You'll die in prison. Judges gives 11-year-old life sentence without parole after killing father. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from respect. This was different. This was the kind of silence that settles over a room when something unthinkable is about to happen, and everyone knows it. Judge Marion Holbrook sat behind the bench, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. She held a single sheet of paper in her hands. Her fingers trembled. Slightly. She had been a judge for 23 years. She had sentenced murderers, rapists, domestic abusers. She had seen the worst humanity had to offer, but she had never sentenced a child. Not like this. The girl sat at the defense table, flanked by two attorneys who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her posture was perfect. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised. She wore a pale blue dress that someone had picked out for her, probably trying to make her look innocent. Younger, more vulnerable. It didn't work. Because Eliza Reed didn't look vulnerable. She looked composed. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail. Her face was clean, expressionless, and her eyes, pale gray, almost translucent in the harsh courtroom lighting, stared straight ahead at the judge without blinking. She was 11 years old. Judge Holbrook cleared her throat. The sound echoed in the stillness. Eliza Marie Reed, she began, her voice low and careful. You have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of murder in the first degree. The evidence presented in this case has been overwhelming. Your own confession, the weapon, the timeline. There is no doubt as to what occurred on the night of March 14th. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s named Diana Thornton, sat rigid at her table. She didn't smile. She didn't look triumphant. She just stared at the girl with an expression that could only be described as haunted. The judge continued. Given the nature of this crime and the deliberate premeditated actions that led to the death of Dr. Adrian Reed, this court has no choice but to impose the maximum sentence allowable under the law. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. A reporter in the back row scribbled frantically in a notebook. A woman in the front, someone who had worked with Adrian Reed, wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The words hung in the air like smoke. Life, without parole, for an 11-year-old. And then, something happened. Eliza smiled. It wasn't a big smile, not a grin, just a small, subtle curve at the corner of her mouth, barely noticeable. But it was there. Judge Holbrook froze. Prosecutor Thornton's face went pale. One of the defense attorneys closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. The bailiff stepped forward to escort Eliza out of the courtroom. She stood without resistance, turned, and walked toward the side door with her head held high. She didn't look back. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just walked. And as the door closed behind her, the room erupted. Journalists rushed toward the exits. Camera crews shoved their way into the hallway. Voices overlapped. Questions shouted. Theories debated, judgments passed in real time. But in that moment, all I could think was, what kind of child smiles after being sentenced to die in prison? My name is Carter Williams. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've spent the last 15 years covering true crime cases, mostly the ones that fall through the cracks. The stories nobody else wants to tell. The cases that don't fit neatly into a headline. When I first heard about Eliza Reed, I thought it was just another tragic story. A child who snapped. A father who pushed too hard. A system that didn't know what to do with a crime that shouldn't exist. I thought I'd make a film about it. A 40-minute piece. Maybe an hour if I found enough material. But the more I dug, the more I realized nothing about this case made sense. I started where every good investigation starts, with the public record, court transcripts, police reports, news articles, video footage from the trial. The facts were simple. too simple. On the night of March 14th, Dr. Adrian Reed was found dead in his home office. He had been shot twice, once in the chest, once in the head. The weapon was his own revolver, a Smith & Wesson he kept locked in a desk drawer for protection. The only other person in the house was his daughter, Eliza. When police arrived, they found her, sitting on the front porch covered in blood. She didn't resist, she didn't run, she didn't ask for a lawyer, she confessed. "I killed my father," she told the officers. Her voice was calm, clear. "I took the gun from his desk and I shot him, twice." The case should have ended there, open and shut. Open and... A confession, a weapon, a body. What else did you need? But here's the thing. Eliza didn't just confess. She explained. She told them exactly where the gun was hidden. She described how she unlocked the drawer. She recounted the argument they'd had earlier that evening. Something about bedtime or homework or screen time. Something mundane. Something that didn't matter. She walked them through every step, and she did it without crying, without shaking, without any sign of remorse. The detectives who interviewed her said the same thing. She sounded like she was recounting a scene from a movie, like it had happened to someone else. One officer, a 20-year veteran named Rick Callahan, later told me, "I've interviewed killers, cold-blooded ones, people who felt nothing. But this was different. She wasn't cold. She was practiced. Practiced." That word stuck with me. Because here's what I couldn't figure out. If Eliza Reed was so calm, so logical, so in control, why would she confess at all? She was 11. She could have said nothing. She could have claimed an intruder. She could have played the role of the traumatized child who found her father dead. But she didn't. She walked police through every detail, handed them the case on a silver platter, and smiled while the judge sentenced her to life. Why? I spent 3 months going through the trial footage, hundreds of hours of recordings, testimony from neighbors, teachers, social workers, psychiatric evaluations, forensic reports. And the more I watched, the more I realized everyone in that courtroom believed the same story. But no one asked the right questions, like how did an 11-year-old know where her father kept the gun? Adrian Reed was a psychologist, a professional. He dealt with troubled kids. Every day, he knew the dangers of leaving a weapon accessible. So why was the drawer unlocked that night? Or, why were there no defensive wounds? Adrian was a fit man, 6 feet tall, strong. If his daughter came at him with a gun, wouldn't he have tried to stop her? Wouldn't there have been a struggle? But the autopsy showed none of that. No bruises, no scratches, no sign that Adrian Reed fought back. It was like he just let it happen. And then there was the timeline. Eliza called 911 at 11:43 p.m. She told the operator, "My father is dead. I shot him." Police arrived at 11:51 p.m., but a neighbor, an older woman named Margaret Finch who lived 2 houses down, told police she heard the gunshots at 11:20 p.m. That's a 23-minute gap. What was Eliza doing for 23 minutes? The prosecution never addressed it. The defense never brought it up, and Eliza never explained. I decided to visit the house. It's still there, on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. A modest 2-story home with a wide front porch and a fenced-in backyard. The kind of place where families are supposed to be safe. It's been empty since the crime. No one wants to buy a house where a man was murdered by his own child. I stood outside and stared at the windows. The blinds were still drawn. The lawn was overgrown. A for sale sign had been planted near the driveway, but it was faded and tilted, like no one had bothered to check on it in months. I thought about Eliza sitting on that porch, covered in her father's blood, waiting for the police. And I thought about that smile. That night I went back to my apartment and pulled up the courtroom footage one more time. I watched the moment when the verdict was read. I watched Eliza's face as the judge said the word, guilty, no. Reaction. I watched the sentencing, life without parole, and the smile. I paused the video, zoomed in. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It wasn't cruel. It was relief, like she had been waiting for this, like she had wanted this, and that's when I realized I wasn't looking at a monster. I was looking at someone who had been taught exactly what to say, exactly what to do, and exactly how to disappear. Someone had trained her. But who? And why? The Reed house sat at the end of Maple Ridge Drive, tucked behind a row of oak trees that had probably been there longer than the neighborhood itself. It was the kind of street where people jogged in the mornings, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, where everyone knew everyone, or at least pretended to. But the Reed house was different. It wasn't just that it was isolated. Plenty of houses on that street had space. Between them, it was the way it felt, like it was watching you. I know that sounds dramatic, but when I stood at the end of the driveway and looked up at those windows, dark, empty, lifeless, I felt it. A weight in the air, a presence. Maybe it was just knowing what had happened inside, or maybe it was something else. I started by talking to the neighbors. Margaret Finch was the first. She was the one who had called the police the night of the murder, not because she saw anything, but because she heard something. She lived 2 houses down, in a small brick ranch with a well-kept garden and a mailbox shaped like a birdhouse. When I knocked on her door, she opened it cautiously, peering at me through the gap. "Mrs. Finch?" I said. "My name is Carter Williams. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm working on a story about the Reed case, and I was hoping I already talked to the police." She interrupted. Her voice was sharp, defensive. "I told them everything I know." "I understand," I said gently. "I'm not looking to cause any trouble. I just want to understand what happened. You were one of the only people who was home that night. Your testimony matters." She studied me for a long moment. Then she sighed and opened the door wider. "5 minutes," she said. "That's all you get." Margaret's living room was spotless. Cream-colored carpet, a floral couch, family photos lined the mantel above the fireplace. Grandchildren, I assumed. She sat down in an armchair and folded her hands in her lap. I sat across from her, camera off. I'd learned a long time ago that people talk more freely when they don't see a lens pointed at them. "Tell me about that night," I said. She took a breath. It was late, around 11:20, maybe 11:25. I was watching television, some crime show, ironically enough, and I heard it, 2 loud pops, like firecrackers but deeper, sharper. "Did you know what it was right away?" "Not at first," she admitted. "I thought maybe someone's car backfired, or kids setting off fireworks, but then I looked out the window and saw the lights on at the Reed house, all of them, every single light." "That was unusual?" "Very," she said firmly. "Adrian was strict about lights. He always turned them off by 10, said it was wasteful to leave them on. But that night the whole house was lit up like a Christmas tree." I made a mental note. "Lights on. Why?" "What did you do?" I asked. "I kept watching. I don't know why. Maybe I had a bad feeling. And then maybe 10 minutes later I saw someone come out of the house." I froze. "Someone came out?" "Yes." Her voice dropped. "A figure. I couldn't see clearly. It was dark, and the trees block most of the view, but I saw someone walk down the driveway, get into a car, and drive away." "What kind of car?" "I don't know. Dark. Sedan, maybe. I didn't get the plates." "Did you tell the police this?" She nodded. "I did, but they didn't seem interested. They kept asking me about Eliza, about whether I'd seen her that night, about what kind of child she was." "And what did you tell them?" Margaret hesitated. "I told them the truth," she said quietly. She was quiet, polite, always kept to herself, but she was always at that window. Margaret pointed toward the Reed house, barely visible. Through her own window. The upstairs one, 2nd floor, far right. She'd stand there for hours just looking. Looking at what? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. It was like she was waiting for something. I thanked Margaret and left. As I walked back toward my car, I glanced up at the Reed house, second floor, far right. The window was still there. The blinds were drawn, but I could see the frame, the glass. And I imagined a small girl standing there, hour after hour, watching the world outside while something darker happened behind her. Next, I spoke with Daniel Cross. He lived directly across the street from the Reeds, a software engineer in his 30s who worked from home. If anyone had seen something, it would be him. He was reluctant at first, but eventually agreed to talk. We sat on his porch, coffee in hand, while he stared at the Reed house like it was a wound. That wouldn't heal. I didn't know them well, he admitted. Adrian was polite, I guess, but distant. He didn't do the whole neighborhood thing. No barbecues, no block parties. He kept to himself. What about Eliza? Daniel's expression shifted. Something uncomfortable flickered across his face. She was strange, he said finally. Not in a bad way, just different. She didn't play with the other kids, didn't ride her bike, didn't even go outside much. I'd see her through the window sometimes, reading or doing homework, but she never looked happy. Did you ever talk to her? Once, he said. Maybe 6 months before it happened. She was sitting on the porch and I was checking my mail. I waved. She waved back. So I walked over and said hi. What did she say? Nothing at first. She just stared at me. And then she asked, "Do you think people can lie so much that they start to believe it?" I blinked. That's what she said? Word for word, Daniel confirmed. I didn't know what to say. I thought maybe it was something she'd read in a book or heard in school. So I just said, I guess so. And she nodded, like I'd confirmed something for her. Then she went back inside. He shook his head. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after what happened, I don't know, it stuck with me. I interviewed 4 more neighbors that week. All of them said the same thing. Adrian Reed was respected, quiet, professional. He worked long hours at his clinic downtown, treating children with behavioral issues. He was well liked by his colleagues, well regarded in the community. But no one really knew him. And Eliza? Creepy, one neighbor said. Too smart for her own good, said another. Always watching, said a third. But when I pressed them, asked them for specifics, for examples, they couldn't give me anything concrete, just feelings, impressions, the kind of thing people say after the fact to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. I went back to the house one more time before I left the neighborhood. This time I didn't just stand outside, I walked up the driveway, past the overgrown lawn, past the faded for sale sign, right up to the front door. It was locked, obviously, but I peered through the windows. The living room was still furnished. A couch, a coffee table, bookshelves lined the far wall. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. It looked normal, like a family had just stepped out for the day and never came back. I moved to the side of the house and looked up at the second-floor window, the one Margaret had mentioned, Eliza's window. I imagined her standing there, night after night, staring out at the street, watching the neighbors, watching the cars, watching the world move on without her. And I wondered, what was she waiting for? That night, I went through my notes. Margaret heard gunshots at 11:20. Eliza called 911 at 11:43, a 23-minute gap. And Margaret saw someone leave the house, but Eliza was the only one there. So who left? I pulled up the police report again, combed through every detail. And that's when I saw it. A single line buried in the forensic section. Secondary set of fingerprints recovered from the weapon. Unidentified. Excluded from evidence due to lack of match in database. Secondary fingerprints. On the gun. Not Eliza's. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. Someone else had touched that gun. Someone else had been in that house. And no one had bothered to follow up. The prosecution's case against Eliza Reed was airtight. At least that's what everyone believed. Diana Thornton, the lead prosecutor, had built her career on winning impossible cases. She was methodical, precise, and relentless. When she stood in front of a jury, she didn't just present evidence. She told a story. And juries loved stories. The story she told about Eliza Reed was simple: a troubled child, a controlling father, a moment of rage that ended in murder. It was clean. It was believable. And it fit perfectly into the 48 hours of news coverage that followed the arrest. But the more I dug into the case, the more I realized something troubling. The story wasn't just simple. It was too simple. I requested the full trial transcript, all 1,247 pages of it. I read every word, every objection, every sidebar, every witness statement, and I started to see the cracks. The prosecution's case rested on 3 pillars. 1, Eliza's confession. 2, the physical. The evidence. The gun, the blood, the forensics. 3, the psychological profile. A child capable of premeditated murder. On the surface, it looked solid. But when you pulled back the layers, things started to fall apart. Let's start with the confession. Eliza gave her statement to Detective Rick Gillahan and his partner, Detective Laura Mendez, on the night of the murder. She was brought to the station at 12:15 a.m. The interview began at 12:47 a.m. She was 11 years old. She had just watched her father die, and she was interrogated for 2 hours without a parent, without a guardian, and without a lawyer. Now, legally, this wasn't a problem. Eliza had waived her right to an attorney. She had agreed to speak with the detectives. Everything was recorded. Everything was by the book. But here's the thing. Eliza didn't just waive her rights. She explained them. When Detective Callahan read her the Miranda warning, she interrupted him halfway through. "I understand," she said calmly. "I have the right to remain silent. I have the right to an attorney. If I can't afford one, one will be provided for me. Anything I say can be used against me in court." Callahan paused, looked at her. "That's right," he said slowly. "Do you want a lawyer, Eliza?" "No," she said. "I want to tell you what happened." And she did. For 2 hours, she walked them through every detail: where the gun was kept, how she unlocked the drawer, the argument with her father, the moment she pulled the trigger. She didn't stutter. She didn't hesitate. She didn't cry. She spoke like someone reading from a script. I found the video of that interview buried in the case files. It had been played in court, but only in excerpts. The defense had objected to certain parts being shown, citing prejudicial impact. The judge had agreed. But I managed to get the full recording. I watched it 3 times. The first time, I focused on what Eliza was saying, the details, the timeline, the logic of her confession. The second time, I focused on how she was saying it, her tone, her body language, the pauses. The third time, I focused on the detectives, and that's when I saw it. At the 1-hour mark, Detective Mendez leaned forward and asked a question that had been bothering me since I first read the transcript. "Eliza, how did you know where your father kept the gun?" Eliza didn't blink. "He showed me," she said. Mendez frowned. "He showed you?" "Yes, about 3 months ago. He said I needed to know where it was in case of an emergency." "What kind of emergency?" "If someone broke into the house, or if he wasn't home and I needed to protect myself." Callahan exchanged a glance with Mendez. Then he asked, "Did he teach you how to use it?" "Yes." "Why would he do that?" Eliza tilted her head slightly, like the question confused her. "Because he wanted me to be prepared," she said simply. I paused the video. A father teaches his 11-year-old daughter how to use a gun. A loaded gun, kept in an unlocked drawer. Why? Adrian Reed was a psychologist. He specialized in children with behavioral issues, anxiety, trauma, aggression. He knew, better than most people, the dangers of exposing a child to a weapon. So why would he deliberately show Eliza where the gun was? Why would he teach her how to use it? The prosecution never asked, the defense never brought it up, and Eliza never explained. Next, the physical evidence. The gun was a Smith & Wesson .38 Special. Adrian's fingerprints were on the grip. Eliza's fingerprints were on the trigger. The ballistics matched. 2 bullets fired. 2 bullets recovered. One from Adrian's chest, one from the wall behind him after passing through his head. The blood spatter analysis confirmed that Eliza had been in close proximity to her father when the shots were fired. Her clothes were covered in blood. Her hands tested. Positive for gunshot residue. Open and shut, except for one thing, the secondary fingerprints. I found the forensic report buried in an appendix. It was technical, dense, filled with jargon that most people wouldn't bother reading. But it was there. Partial fingerprints recovered from the weapons. Barrel and magazine release. Prints do not match victim or suspect. No match found in local or federal databases. Excluded from evidence as non-probative. Non-probative. In other words, irrelevant. But how could fingerprints on a murder weapon be irrelevant? I called the forensic lab that had processed the evidence. I spoke with a technician named Roy Delgado, who had worked on the case. Those prints, I said, why were they excluded? Roy sighed. Because they were partials, smudged. We couldn't get a clean match, and since they didn't belong to the victim or the suspect, the assumption was that they were old, maybe from the gun shop, maybe from a friend who'd handled it months earlier. But you don't know that for sure. No, he admitted. We don't. Did anyone follow up, try to identify them? A pause. Not that I'm aware of, he said quietly. I sat with that for a while. Someone else had touched that gun, recently enough that their prints were still detectable, and no one had bothered to figure out who, because it didn't fit the story. Finally, the psychological profile. The prosecution brought in Dr. Victor Harmon, a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Eliza twice, once immediately after the arrest and once 3 weeks before the trial. His testimony was damning. Eliza Reed exhibits clear signs of antisocial personality traits, he told the jury. A lack of empathy, an inability to form genuine emotional connections, a tendency toward manipulation and deceit. He described her as cold, calculated, dangerous. This is not a child who acted out of fear or desperation, he said. This is a child who made a deliberate choice, and she shows no remorse. The jury ate it up. But here's what bothered me. Dr. Harmon's evaluation was based on 2 sessions, a total of 3 hours with Eliza. 3 hours. And in those 3 hours, he had diagnosed her with traits typically associated with adult psychopathy, a diagnosis that most psychologists refuse to apply to children because the brain is still developing. I tracked down Dr. Harmon. He agreed to speak with me on the condition that I didn't record the conversation. We met at a coffee shop near his office. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, with the kind of calm demeanor that probably made him very good at his job. I stand by my evaluation, he said before I could even ask. Eliza Reed is not a typical child. But isn't it possible, I said carefully, that her behavior was a trauma response, that she was in shock, that she was parroting things she'd been taught to say? He frowned. Taught by whom? I don't know, but don't you think it's worth considering? He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Mr. Williams, he said slowly, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've evaluated hundreds of children, and I can tell you with certainty, Eliza Reed knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't confused, she wasn't traumatized, she was in complete control. Then why did she confess? He smiled faintly. That, he said, is the question, isn't it? I left that meeting more confused than ever, because Dr. Harmon was right about one thing. Eliza's confession didn't make sense. If she was as calculating as everyone believed, why would she hand the police everything they needed to convict her? Why not stay silent? Why not claim self-defense? Why not play the victim? Unless she wanted to be convicted. That night I went back to the trial footage. I watched Eliza sit through 3 weeks of testimony. I watched her listen to witness after witness describe her as cold, unfeeling, dangerous, and she never reacted. Not once. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes forward, like she was watching a play about someone else's life. But there was one moment, just one, where something changed. It was during Dr. Harmon's testimony. He was describing his evaluation, talking about Eliza's lack of empathy, her manipulative tendencies, and for just a second, Eliza looked down at her hands. Her jaw tightened, her fingers curled into fists, and then, just as quickly, she relaxed, looked up, went back to that calm, neutral expression. But I saw it. For one brief moment, the mask slipped, and underneath I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not defiance, fear. The video was grainy, shot on an old handheld camera in a sterile interrogation room with flickering fluorescent lights and cinder block walls painted institutional beige. The timestamp in the corner read, March 15th, 12:47 a.m., less than 2 hours after Adrian Reed's body was discovered. I'd watched this footage a dozen times already, but every time I hit play, I saw something new. A gesture, a pause, a flicker of something behind Eliza's eyes. That didn't match the story everyone was telling. The camera was positioned at an angle, capturing both Eliza and the two detectives sitting across from her. Detective Rick Callahan, mid-40s, barrel-chested, with the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much, sat closest to her. His partner, Detective Laura Mendez, younger, sharper, with dark eyes that missed nothing, leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Eliza sat perfectly upright. Her hands were folded on the table. Her pale blue dress, the same one she'd been wearing when police arrived, was stained dark with dried blood. Her hair, still in that neat ponytail, hadn't moved. She looked like a porcelain doll. Eliza, Callahan began, his voice gentle, almost paternal. Can you tell us what happened tonight? Eliza didn't hesitate. I killed my father. Her voice was clear, steady, no tremor, no tears. Callahan exchanged a glance with Mendez. Okay, he said slowly. Can you tell us how that happened? I took his gun from the desk drawer in his office. I walked into the living room where he was sitting. I pointed it at him, and I pulled the trigger, twice. She said it like she was reciting directions to the grocery store. Mendez leaned forward. Why did you do that, Eliza? For the first time, Eliza paused, just for a second. Her eyes flicked to the left, toward the corner of the room where the camera was mounted, then back to Mendez. Because he deserved it, she said. I paused the video. That, because he deserved it, had been played over and over in the media. It became the headline, the soundbite, the proof that Eliza Reed was a cold-blooded killer. But no one ever asked the follow-up question. Why did he deserve it? I scrolled through the transcript, found the next exchange. Detective Mendez. What did your father do, Eliza? Why did he deserve it? Eliza Reed. He lied. Detective Callahan. He lied about what? Eliza Reed. Everything. And that was it. She didn't elaborate. The detectives didn't press. They moved on to the logistics, the gun, the timeline, the evidence. But that answer stuck with me. He lied about everything. What did that mean? I reached out to Dr. Sarah Lindell, a forensic psychologist who specialized in child trauma and false confessions. She agreed to watch the interrogation video and give me her professional opinion. We met at her office in downtown Portland, a bright, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows and abstract art on the walls. She poured us both coffee and settled into her chair, laptop open. Before we start, she said, I want to be clear. I'm not diagnosing Eliza. I haven't evaluated her personally, but I can tell you what I see in this footage. That's all I'm asking. She hit play. We watched in silence for 20 minutes. Dr. Lindell took notes, occasionally pausing to rewind and watch a section again. When the video ended, she sat back and let out a long breath. Well, I asked. She tapped her pen against her notebook. "This isn't the behavior of a psychopath," she said finally. I blinked. It's not? No. A child with antisocial traits, true antisocial traits, would either refuse to speak or they'd spin an elaborate lie to deflect blame. They'd try to manipulate the situation to their advantage. But Eliza doesn't do that. She confesses immediately, willingly, almost eagerly. So what does that mean? Dr. Lindell rewound the video to the moment when Eliza said, "I killed my father." "Look at her face," she said. "Really look at it." I leaned closer. Eliza's expression was neutral, calm, but her eyes were wrong. They were too wide, too focused, like she was forcing herself to look directly at the detectives without blinking. "She's performing," Dr. Lindell said quietly. "Performing?" "Yes, she's saying the words she's supposed to say. She's hitting the high marks. But it's not natural, it's rehearsed." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You think someone told her what to say?" "I think," Dr. Lindell said carefully, "that this child was trained to respond this way, to take responsibility, to absorb blame without question. That's not psychopathy, that's conditioning." She paused the video again, this time on Eliza's hands. "See that?" She pointed to the screen. Eliza's fingers were laced together tightly, so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "That's tension," Dr. Lindell said. "That's fear. She's gripping her own hands like she's trying to hold herself together. A child who feels no remorse wouldn't do that. A child who's in control wouldn't need to." I thought about that conversation for days. Conditioning. What kind of person conditions a child to confess to murder, and why? I went back to the case files, started pulling everything I could find on Adrian Reed. On paper, he was a model citizen, a respected psychologist with his own private practice. He specialized in treating children with behavioral disorders, ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, anxiety, trauma. He'd published 3 books, given lectures at universities, been quoted in national magazines. Everyone who knew him described him the same way: brilliant, dedicated, compassionate. But I've learned something over the years. The people who look the best on paper are often the ones with the most to hide. I started digging into his professional history, court records, licensing boards, complaints, and that's when I found it. In 2019, 3 years before the murder, Adrian Reed had been investigated by the state medical board for unorthodox treatment methods. A parent had filed a complaint. Their 12-year-old son had been seeing Dr. Reed for anger management. After 6 months of treatment, the boy's behavior had gotten worse. He became withdrawn, stopped eating, started having nightmares. When the parents confronted Adrian, he told them it was part of the process, that the child needed to break down before he could rebuild. The parents pulled their son out of treatment and filed a formal complaint. The investigation lasted 4 months. In the end, the board found insufficient evidence of malpractice and closed the case. But Adrian's license was flagged. He was required to undergo a peer review. His methods were scrutinized. And then quietly, the complaint disappeared from the public record, sealed. I tried to contact the family who had filed the complaint. I found their names in the case file, but when I called, the number was disconnected. I searched for them online, social media, property records, anything. Nothing. They'd vanished. I called the state medical board, spoke with a woman named Janet Ruiz, who worked in the licensing department. "I'm looking into a complaint filed against Dr. Adrian Reed in 2019, I said. "Can you tell me what happened to it?" There was a pause. "That case is sealed," she said carefully. "I understand. But can you at least tell me why it was sealed?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Mr. Williams," she said finally, "I can't discuss the details of a sealed case, but I can tell you this. When a complaint is sealed, it's usually because a settlement was reached, a financial agreement in exchange for confidentiality. So the family was paid off?" I didn't say that, but she didn't have to. That night I sat in my apartment staring at a corkboard covered in notes, photos, and printouts. Red string connected names, dates, locations. It looked like something out of a crime thriller. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. I stared at the photo of Adrian Reed, a professional headshot from his clinic's website. He was smiling, clean-cut, trustworthy, but underneath that smile, what was he hiding? I thought about Eliza sitting in that interrogation room, hands gripped together reciting her confession like a script. Because he deserved it. He lied about everything. What had Adrian done to her? What had he done to the other children? I pulled up the video one more time, watched it from the beginning, and this time I noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the 18-minute mark, Detective Callahan asked Eliza how she felt after shooting her father. She didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something, but then she stopped. She glanced at the camera again, and then she said in that same flat, emotionless voice, "I felt nothing." But just before she said it, just for a fraction of a second, her eyes filled with tears. She blinked them away before they could fall. But I saw them. Dr. Lindell was right. This wasn't a child with no emotions. This was a child who had been taught to hide them, to bury them, to perform. And the performance was so convincing that an entire courtroom, an entire country, had believed it. I rewound the tape again, froze it on Eliza's face, and for the first time I realized we weren't looking at a confession. We were looking at a cover-up. But who was she covering for? And what was she so afraid of? Dr. Adrian Reed's office was located in a renovated Victorian house on the west side of town, nestled between a yoga studio and a small bookstore. The sign outside read, "Reed Child Psychology. Compassionate care for growing minds." It had been closed since his death. The windows were dark, the door was locked, but the sign was still there, swaying slightly in the wind. I stood on the sidewalk and stared at it. Compassionate care. That's what everyone remembered about Adrian Reed. His compassion, his dedication, his ability to connect with children who couldn't connect with anyone else. But the more I learned about him, the more I realized no one really knew him. They knew the version he wanted them to see. I started with his colleagues. Dr. Vanessa Ortiz had worked in the same building as Adrian for 6 years. Her practice was on the second floor, family therapy mostly. She agreed to meet me at a cafe a few blocks away. She was in her early 50s, with short gray hair and the kind of exhausted expression that comes from listening to other people's problems all day. I didn't know Adrian well, she admitted, stirring her coffee. We'd pass each other in the hallway, exchange pleasantries, but he kept to himself. "Did you ever see him with his daughter?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I didn't even know he had a daughter until after it happened. He never mentioned her." "That doesn't strike you as odd? A child psychologist who never talks about his own child?" Vanessa frowned. "I suppose. But some people are private, and Adrian was very private. Did you ever notice anything unusual about him? Anything that made you uncomfortable?" She hesitated. "There was one thing," she said slowly. "About a year before the murder. I was leaving late one night, maybe 9 o'clock. I thought the building was empty, but when I passed Adrian's office, I heard voices." Voices? A child, crying, and Adrian's voice, very calm, very controlled, saying something I couldn't quite make out. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should knock, but then the crying stopped, and I heard the child say, "I'm sorry. I'll do better." She looked down at her coffee. I told myself it was just a session running late, that the child was upset and Adrian was helping them work through it, but the way he said it, "I'll do better," like it was something they'd been taught to say. "Did you ever follow up?" "No," she admitted. "I should have, but I didn't." Next, I tracked down Dr. Martin Cross, a psychiatrist who had worked with Adrian at a Children's Hospital before Adrian opened his private practice. We met at his office, a cluttered space filled with medical textbooks and framed degrees. He was older than I expected, maybe late 60s, with deep lines around his eyes. Adrian was brilliant, he said when I asked about him. One of the best clinicians I've ever worked with. He had an instinct for reading children, understanding what they needed. But, I prompted. He smiled faintly. But he was unorthodox. He believed in pushing boundaries, testing limits. He thought traditional therapy was too soft, too slow. What do you mean by pushing boundaries? Martin leaned back in his chair. Adrian believed that children were more resilient than people gave them credit for, that they could handle difficult truths, difficult emotions. He would sometimes expose them to situations that other therapists would consider inappropriate. Like what? Confrontation, role reversal, forcing them to confront their fears head-on rather than gradually desensitizing them. He called it accelerated exposure therapy. Most of us called it reckless. I made a note. Did you ever report him? No, Martin said quietly. I should have. But Adrian was careful. He never crossed the line in a way that could be easily documented, and the parents loved him. They thought he was a miracle worker. Why did they love him? Because he got results, quickly. A child who came to him with anxiety or behavioral issues would often improve within weeks. The parents didn't ask how. They just saw their child getting better. He paused. But I always wondered, he said, what the cost was. I left that meeting with a knot in my stomach. What the cost was. I thought about Eliza, about the way she'd confessed so calmly, the way she'd absorbed blame without question. What had Adrian done to her? I dug deeper. I found 3 more complaints filed against Adrian over the years. None of them had resulted in formal disciplinary action, but they followed a pattern. Complaint number 1, 2016. A parent reported that their 9-year-old daughter had become robotic after 6 months of treatment with Dr. Reed. She stopped expressing emotions, stopped asking questions. When asked how she felt, she would respond, "I feel what I'm supposed to feel." Complaint number 2, 2018. A father claimed that his 10-year-old son had developed severe insomnia after treatment. The boy would wake up in the middle of the night repeating phrases like, "I have to be better, I have to be perfect." Complaint number 3, 2019. The one I'd already found. A 12-year-old boy who became withdrawn, stopped eating, and started having nightmares. In each case, the complaint was investigated and dismissed. Insufficient evidence. No clear violation of protocol. But the pattern was undeniable. Adrian Reed wasn't just treating children. He was reprogramming them. I found a former patient. Her name was Emily Vargas. She was 19 now, but she'd been treated by Adrian when she was 8 years old. It took me 3 weeks to track her down, and another week to convince her to talk to me. We met at a park. She sat on a bench, arms wrapped around herself, even though it wasn't cold. "I don't remember much," she said quietly. I was so young, but I remember the way he looked at me. "What do you mean?" "Like I was a problem to be solved, not a person, a problem." She picked at a loose thread on her jacket. "He used to make me sit in his office and repeat things," she said. Over and over. Phrases like, "I am in control, I am responsible, I am enough." At first I thought it was helpful. Like affirmations, you know. But after a while it didn't feel like affirmations, it felt like instructions. Instructions for what? To be what he wanted me to be, she said. Quiet. Obedient. Perfect. She looked at me and I saw something raw in her eyes. "I'm still trying to undo it," she said. "Even now. I still hear his voice in my head sometimes, telling me what to think, what to feel." "Did your parents know?" "No," she said. "They thought I was getting better. And I was, in a way. I stopped having tantrums, stopped being difficult. But I also stopped being me." I asked Emily if she'd ever met Eliza. She shook her head. "I didn't know he had a daughter, but if she grew up with him, She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That night, I went back to the video of Eliza's interrogation. I watched it with fresh eyes, and this time, I didn't see a cold, calculated child. I saw a girl who had been trained her entire life to be exactly what her father wanted her to be, to absorb blame, to take responsibility, to never question, to never resist. I thought about Adrian's methods, the complaints, the patterns, and I realized something chilling. Eliza didn't confess because she was guilty. She confessed because that's what she'd been conditioned to do. Adrian had spent 11 years molding her into the perfect subject, teaching her to suppress her emotions, to follow instructions, to believe that she was responsible for everything that went wrong. And when he died, she did exactly what he'd trained her to do. She took the blame. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. If Eliza didn't kill her father, who did? I pulled up the forensic report again. The secondary fingerprints on the gun, the ones that had been dismissed as non-probative. Someone else had touched that weapon. Someone who had been in the house that night. Someone who had walked out the front door and driven away while Eliza sat on the porch, covered in her father's blood, waiting for the police. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Adrian Reed was not a victim. He was an abuser, and his daughter was not a killer. She was a witness. But if the system had already decided she was guilty, how was I supposed to prove otherwise? I closed my laptop and stared at the photo of Adrian Reed on my corkboard. That smile, that perfect polished smile. How many people had he hurt? How many children had he broken? And why had no one stopped him? The next morning I received an email. It was from an anonymous account. No subject line, just 3 words. Ask about Camden. I stared at the screen. Camden. I'd never heard that name before, but something told me it was important. Camden. The name echoed in my head for hours after I received that email. I ran searches, cross-referenced it with Adrian Reed's name, checked court records, news archives, social media. Nothing. Whoever Camden was, they'd been erased. Or buried. I replied to the anonymous email. Who is Camden? How do I find them? The response came 30 minutes later. You won't, but you can find the person who tried to save them. And then a name, Rebecca Marsh. Rebecca Marsh. I plugged the name into every database I had access to, found dozens of matches. But only one stood out. Rebecca Marsh, age 42. Former nanny. Last known address. A small apartment complex 20 miles outside the city. I called. No answer. I drove out there the next day. The building was old. Cracked siding, rusted railings. The kind of place people ended up when they were running out of options. I knocked on the door to apartment 3B. Waited. Footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. The door opened a crack. A chain lock held it in place. A woman peered out at me, thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Rebecca Marsh? I asked. Her expression shifted. Fear, recognition. Who are you? My name is Carter Williams. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm investigating the Reed case. I think you might be able to help me. She started to close the door. Wait, I said quickly. Please, I know you worked for Adrian Reed. I know you left before the murder. I just want to understand what happened. She stopped. The door stayed cracked. I can't talk about this, she said quietly. Why not? Because I signed an NDA. An NDA? I blinked. You signed a non-disclosure agreement with Adrian Reed? Not with him, she said. With his lawyer, after I quit. Rebecca, Adrian is dead. The NDA doesn't protect him anymore. It protects whoever wants the truth buried. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, she unlatched the chain and opened the door. Rebecca's apartment was sparse. A couch, a small kitchen table, a television on a stand, no pictures on the walls, no personal touches. It felt temporary, like she was ready to leave at any moment. She sat on the couch and wrapped a blanket around herself, even though the room was warm. "I don't know what you think I can tell you," she said. "Tell me about Camden." Her face went pale. "How do you know that name?" "Someone sent it to me, anonymously. They said you tried to save them." Rebecca closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. "Camden wasn't a person," she said quietly. "It was a code name." "A code name for what?" "For the children Adrian was experimenting on." The word hung in the air like smoke. Experimenting. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. Rebecca pulled the blanket tighter. "I started working for Adrian in 2018, she said. "I was hired to take care of Eliza, pick her up from school, make her dinner, help with homework, normal nanny stuff." "What was she like?" "Quiet, polite, almost too polite. She never asked for anything, never complained. She just did what she was told." She paused. "At first I thought she was just well-behaved, but after a few weeks I realized it wasn't normal. She didn't play, she didn't laugh, she didn't act like a kid." "Did you ask Adrian about it?" "Once. He told me Eliza was special, that she had unique needs and I should follow his instructions exactly. He gave me a list of rules, strict routines, meal times, bedtimes, screen time, everything was scheduled down to the minute." "And if she broke the rules?" Rebecca's hands trembled. "She didn't," she said. "She never did. It was like she was afraid to." I leaned forward. "What about Camden?" Rebecca took a shaky breath. "About 6 months into the job, I started noticing something strange. Adrian would have late-night appointments, children coming to the house after hours. Always the same ones. Maybe 4 or 5 different kids. Did you ever meet them?" "No. He made me leave before they arrived. He'd tell me I could go home early. I thought it was generous at first. But then I realized he just didn't want me around." "Why not?" "Because of what he was doing." She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the parking lot below. "One night, I forgot my phone in the house. I came back to get it. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in, and I heard voices coming. From Adrian's office." "What were they saying?" "I couldn't make it out clearly, but I heard a child crying, and Adrian's voice, very calm, saying, 'You need to be stronger than this. We've talked about this. You know what happens if you can't control it.'" She turned to face me. I stood outside the door for maybe 30 seconds, and then the crying stopped. Just stopped like someone had flipped a switch. "What did you do?" "I grabbed my phone and left, but the next day I asked Adrian about it. I said I'd heard something the night before and wanted to make sure everything was okay." She laughed bitterly. He smiled at me, that perfect calm smile, and he said, "Rebecca, you must have been mistaken. I didn't have any appointments last night." He said it so confidently that I almost believed him. "But you didn't." "No, because I knew what I'd heard." Rebecca sat back down. A few weeks later, I was cleaning Eliza's room and I found a notebook. It was hidden under her mattress. What was in it? Pages and pages of the same sentences, written over and over in her handwriting. Things like, "I am responsible. I am in control. I will not fail." It went on for dozens of pages. She rubbed her arms like she was cold. And at the back of the notebook, there was a list of names, just first names: Tyler, Sophia, Marcus, and at the bottom, Camden. "Did you ask Eliza about it?" I tried, but when I mentioned the notebook, she looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Not fear, not anger, just emptiness. And she said, "That's private, you shouldn't have looked." Rebecca's voice cracked. That's when I knew something was really wrong. "I went to Adrian," she continued. "I told him I was concerned about Eliza's mental health, that I thought she might need help. And he got angry. I'd never seen him angry before. He told me I was overstepping, that I didn't understand the situation, that if I continued to interfere, he'd have no choice but to let me go. And I quit the next day. But before I left, his lawyer called me, offered me 6 months' salary in exchange for signing an NDA. Said it was standard procedure for anyone who worked with children in sensitive therapeutic environments. She shook her head. I should have refused. I should have gone to the police. But I was scared, and I needed the money. So I signed. I sat back, trying to process everything she'd told me. Do you know what happened to those other children? The ones on the list? No, I tried to find out after the murder. I looked up the names online, but there's nothing. No records, no social media. It's like they never existed. Or someone made sure they disappeared. Said quietly. Rebecca looked at me with haunted eyes. I think Adrian was running some kind of program, she said. I don't know what it was, but those kids weren't just patients. They were subjects. Subjects in what? I don't know, she admitted. But whatever it was, Eliza was part of it, and Camden was the one who couldn't handle it. What happened to Camden? Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. I think Camden is the reason I'm still alive. I frowned. What do you mean? About a week after I quit, I got a phone call. Middle of the night. No caller ID. I answered, and I heard a child's voice, just one word. Run. That's it? That's it. The call ended, and the next morning I found out that Adrian's office had been broken into. Files were stolen, but the police report said nothing valuable was taken. No money, no equipment, just files. She looked at me. I think someone was trying to expose him, and I think they wanted me as far away as possible before it happened. Who? I don't know, but I think it was one of the children. Maybe Camden, maybe someone else, someone who finally had enough. I thanked Rebecca and left. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't stop thinking about that list of names. Tyler, Sophia, Marcus, Camden, 4 children, maybe more. All of them connected to Adrian Reed, all of them erased. I sat in my car and pulled up the forensic report again. The secondary fingerprints. What if they didn't belong to an adult? What if they belonged to one of those children? What if Camden, or Tyler, or Sophia, or Marcus had been in the house that night? What if one of them had finally fought back? And if that was true, then Eliza didn't just confess to protect herself. She confessed to protect one of them. I started the car, started the way, and drove back to the city. I didn't know where Camden was, but I knew someone who might, someone who had been there from the beginning, someone who had helped Adrian cover it all up. The lawyer. The lawyer's name was Vincent Halloway. I found it buried in the court filings from Eliza's case. A footnote, really. He'd represented Adrian's estate after the murder, handled the transfer of assets, closed out the house, paid off debts. But before that, he'd been Adrian's personal attorney for over a decade, which meant he knew everything. Halloway's office was in a glass high-rise downtown, the kind of building where everyone wore expensive suits and no one made eye contact in the elevator. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't call ahead. I just walked in, rode the elevator to the 14th floor, and told the receptionist I needed to speak with Mr. Halloway about the Reed case. She looked at me like I'd asked to see the president. Mr. Halloway doesn't take walk-ins, she said coolly. Tell him it's about Adrian Reed and Camden. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her hand hesitate over the phone. One moment. She made the call, spoke quietly, hung up. Mr. Halloway, we'll see you, she said, surprised. But he only has 10 minutes. Vincent Halloway's office was exactly what I expected. Dark wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal volumes that probably hadn't been touched in years. Halloway himself was in his 60s. Silver hair, sharp eyes, the kind of man who'd spent a lifetime learning how to say nothing while sounding like he'd said everything. He didn't stand when I entered, just gestured to the chair across from his desk. Mr. Williams, he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. I understand you're working on a documentary about the Reed case. That's right. And you mentioned a name, Camden. I did. He folded his hands on the desk. I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name. That's interesting, I said, because Rebecca Marsh seems to think you do. A flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance, maybe, or concern. Ms. Marsh signed a non-disclosure agreement, he said carefully, which she honored. She didn't tell me anything specific, but she did tell me enough to know that Adrian Reed was involved in something he shouldn't have been, and that you helped him cover it up. Holloway's jaw tightened. I don't know what you think you're uncovering, Mr. Williams, but I suggest you be very careful. Defamation is a serious charge. So is obstruction of justice. We stared at each other. What do you want? He asked finally. I want to know about Eliza's mother. He blinked. Whatever he'd been expecting, it wasn't that. Her mother. Yes, Miranda Reed. She disappeared from Eliza's life when the girl was 3 years old. Custody was awarded to Adrian, full custody, no visitation, and Miranda never fought it. I'm not sure what that has to do with... Why didn't she fight it? I interrupted. What mother just walks away from her child without a fight? Holloway leaned back in his chair. You'd have to ask her, he said. I would, if I could find her. But she's been off the grid for 8 years. No social media, no employment records, no address. It's like she vanished. People vanish all the time, Mr. Williams. Not like this. Not unless someone made sure of it. Holloway studied me for a long moment. Adrian Reed was my client, he said slowly. Everything we discussed was protected by attorney-client privilege. Even after his death, I am bound by that privilege. Unless what you know involves ongoing harm to a minor. His eyes narrowed. There is no ongoing harm. Eliza is in prison. The case is closed. Is it? I leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a child was convicted of a crime she didn't commit to protect someone else. And I think you know who that someone is. Holloway stood. This meeting is over. Was it Miranda? I pressed. Was she the one who killed Adrian? Get out. Or was it one of the other children? One of the ones Adrian was experimenting on? Out now. I stood slowly. You can hide behind privilege all you want, Mr. Holloway, but the truth is going to come out. And when it does, everyone's going to know you helped bury it. I walked to the door, paused. One more thing, I said. If you were really bound by privilege, you wouldn't have agreed to see me. The fact that you did means you're scared, which means you know something's wrong. I left before he could respond. I went straight to my car and started digging into Miranda Reed's background. Her maiden name was Miranda Faulkner. She married Adrian in 2011. Eliza was born in 2012. And in 2015, Miranda filed for divorce. The divorce proceedings were sealed, but I managed to find a case summary through a contact at the courthouse. The filing cited irreconcilable differences. Adrian had countered with a custody petition, claiming Miranda was emotionally unstable and unfit to parent. The court sided with Adrian, full custody, no visitation, no contact. But here's what didn't make sense. Miranda never appealed, never fought back, never even filed a response. She just disappeared. I tracked down the judge who'd presided over the case, retired now, living in a quiet suburb an hour outside the city. His name was Howard Brennan. He agreed to meet me at a diner near his house. He was in his 70s, graying beard, tired eyes. He ordered coffee and stared at the menu like he wasn't really seeing it. I remember the Reed case, he said when I brought it up. How could I forget it was one of the most one-sided custody battles I'd ever seen. One-sided how? Adrian came to court with a file this thick. He held his hands a foot apart. Psychiatric evaluations, medical records, testimony from colleagues. He painted Miranda as a danger to the child. Said she had a history of mental illness, substance abuse, violent outbursts. Was any of it true? Brennan sighed. I don't know. She never showed up to defend herself, never hired a lawyer, never filed a single piece of evidence in her favor. Why not? I assumed she couldn't afford it, or didn't care. But looking back, he trailed. Looking back, what? I prompted. Looking back, it felt wrong. A mother who's being accused of being unfit doesn't just roll over and give up. She fights. Even if she loses, she fights. He stirred his coffee absently. But Miranda didn't fight. She just vanished. And at the time, I told myself it was for the best. That maybe Adrian was right. That maybe she was unstable. But I've thought about that case a lot over the years. And the more I think about it, the more I wonder if she wasn't running from something. Or someone. I left the diner with a knot in my stomach. Miranda hadn't disappeared because she didn't care. She'd disappeared because she was afraid. I spent the next week trying to find her. I called every Miranda Faulkner I could find, sent emails, left voicemails. Most didn't respond. The ones who did weren't the right person. And then, late one night, I got a call from an unknown number. "Stop looking for me." The voice was quiet, strained, female. "Miranda," I said. A pause. "If you keep digging, you're going to get hurt. I'm trying to help your daughter. You can't help her." Her voice cracked. "No one can." "Miranda, Eliza is in prison for a crime I don't think she committed, but I can't prove it without your help." Silence. "She confessed," Miranda said finally. "She told them she did it. Because she was protecting someone. Maybe you. I wasn't there." "Then who was?" Another long silence. "I can't tell you," she whispered. "If I tell you, they'll know." "Who will know?" "The people Adrian worked for." My blood went cold. "What people?" "I can't." Her voice broke. "I have to go." "Wait." The line went dead. I sat in the dark, staring at my phone. The people Adrian worked for. Adrian wasn't just experimenting on children for his own research. He was working for someone else. Someone with enough power to make witnesses disappear, to seal records, to intimidate a mother into abandoning her child. I pulled up everything I had on Adrian's career, his funding sources, his research grants, his professional affiliations, and I found it. Buried in a tax document from 2017, a research grant, $500,000 awarded to Adrian Reed by the Cordell Institute for Behavioral Sciences. I'd never heard of them. I searched the name, found a website, sparse, professional, corporate. The Cordell Institute was a private research organization specializing in advanced psychological conditioning and behavioral modification. They had offices in 3 states. Board members with names I recognized, university professors, psychiatrists, a former surgeon general, and buried in their list of past projects. Project Camden, Developmental Resilience Through Controlled Behavioral Adaptation. Camden wasn't a person, it was a program, and Adrian Reed had been running it out of his home, using children as test subjects. I thought about Eliza, about the notebook Rebecca had found, about the phrases written over and over. "I am responsible, I am in control. I will not fail." She hadn't just been Adrian's daughter. She'd been his proof of concept. And now she was sitting in prison, taking the blame for something she didn't do, because the people who funded that program needed it buried. I opened a new document and started typing. Project Camden, the Cordell Institute, Adrian Reed. This wasn't just about one murder. This was about an entire network of people who had turned children into experiments. And Eliza was just the one who got caught. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eliza's face in that courtroom, that blank expression, that small, controlled smile. She wasn't just protecting someone. She was protecting an entire system. The next morning, I started digging into the Cordell Institute. Their website was polished, professional, full of buzzwords like innovation, breakthrough, research, and evidence-based intervention. They claimed to specialize in helping children with severe behavioral disorders, aggression, defiance, emotional dysregulation. But the more I read, the more it sounded like something else. Not help, control. I called the main office. A receptionist answered on the second ring. Cordell Institute, how may I direct your call? Hi, I'm working on a documentary about child psychology programs. I was hoping to speak with someone about Project Camden. A pause. I'm sorry, we don't have any programs by that name. Are you sure? I have, documentation showing a grant awarded to Dr. Adrian Reed in 2017 for a project called Camden. Another pause. Longer this time. One moment, please. The line went silent. Then, instead of being transferred, I heard a click. The call had been disconnected. I tried calling back, 3 times, each time. The receptionist gave me a different excuse. That department is unavailable. We don't discuss private research projects. I'm going to have to ask you to stop calling. They were stonewalling me, which meant I was on to something. I shifted tactics. If the Cordell Institute wouldn't talk to me, maybe I could find someone who used to work there. I started searching LinkedIn, found dozens of profiles listing employment at Cordell, researchers, clinicians, administrative staff. Most were still there, but a few had left. One name stood out, Dr. Natalie Brenner. She'd worked at Cordell from 2015 to 2019 as a child psychologist. Her profile listed her current position as an independent consultant. No company, no location. But there was a contact email. I sent a message. Dr. Brenner, my name is Carter Williams. I'm investigating Project Camden and the work of Dr. Adrian Reed. I believe you may have information that could help. Please contact me. I didn't expect a response, but 2 hours later, I got one. Don't use email. Call this number. Once. If I don't answer, don't call again. A phone number followed. I called immediately. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice answered. Who gave you my name? No one. I found you through LinkedIn. You worked at Cordell. I don't work there anymore. I know. That's why I'm calling. I need to know about Project Camden. Silence. Dr. Brenner? You need to stop asking questions about that project, she said quietly. For your own safety. Why? Because the people who ran it don't want it exposed, and they have the resources to make sure it stays buried. Then help me expose it, she laughed bitterly. You think I haven't tried? What happened? Another long silence. Meet me tomorrow, she said finally. 2 p.m. Lincoln Park. The bench near the fountain. Come alone. If I see anyone with you, I walk. I'll be there. The line went dead. Lincoln Park was crowded. Joggers, dog walkers, parents with strollers. I sat on the bench near the fountain and waited. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman approached, mid-40s. Dark hair pulled back, sunglasses even though it was overcast. She sat down next to me without looking at me. Dr. Brenner? I asked. Don't say my name. Okay. She stared straight ahead, watching the fountain. I signed an NDA when I left Cordell, she said. If they find out I talked to you, I'll lose everything. My license, my savings, maybe more. I won't use your name, I just need to understand what Camden was. She took a breath. It started as a legitimate research project, she said. The goal was to help children with extreme behavioral disorders, kids who couldn't function in normal therapeutic settings. The idea was to develop a fast-track intervention, something that could produce results in weeks instead of years. How? Behavioral conditioning, repetition, controlled environments, positive and negative reinforcement. It wasn't supposed to be harmful. It was supposed to be efficient. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about helping kids. It became about control, about proving that you could reshape a child's personality through systematic conditioning. She finally looked at me. Adrian Reed was the lead clinician. He ran the program. Out of his private practice, the Cordell Institute provided the funding and oversight. And the parents, they had no idea what was really happening. What do you mean? They thought their kids were getting cutting-edge therapy. They signed consent forms, but those forms didn't explain what the program actually involved, which was isolation, sleep deprivation, repetitive tasks designed to break down resistance, and constant reinforcement of specific phrases and behaviors until the child internalized them. My stomach turned. "That's not therapy," I said. "That's brainwashing." "No," she said quietly. But by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I reported it to the board. I filed a formal complaint, and within a week, I was told my position was being eliminated due to budget cuts. "They fired you." "They silenced me," she corrected. "And they made—" Sure, I couldn't talk about it. The NDA I signed wasn't optional. It was sign or face legal action. "How many children were in the program?" I asked. "I don't know the exact number. Maybe a dozen, maybe more." Adrian was careful. He kept everything compartmentalized. I only saw a handful of case files. "Do you remember any names?" She hesitated. "Tyler, Sophia, Marcus, and one other. The file just said Subject C." "Camden," I said. She nodded. Camden was the first, the pilot case, a 9-year-old with severe anxiety and oppositional defiant disorder. Adrian worked with that child for 6 months, and by the end, the transformation was remarkable. The anxiety was gone. The defiance was gone. The child was calm, obedient, compliant. "That sounds like success." "It sounds like erasure," she said sharply. "That child didn't get better. That child disappeared. Everything that made them was gone. They became a shell, a perfectly controlled shell." She looked away. And when I expressed concern, Adrian told me I didn't understand the science, that I was being emotional, that the child was better now. "What happened to Camden?" "I don't know. After I left, I tried to follow up, but the file disappeared. The child's parents stopped returning calls. It's like Camden never existed." I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of Eliza from the trial. "Do you recognize her?" Dr. Brenner stared at the image. Her face went pale. "That's Adrian's daughter." "Yes." "Oh, my God," she whispered. "She was in the program." "I think she was more than that. I think she was the proof of concept, the child he used to perfect his methods before applying them to others." Dr. Brenner covered her mouth. "That's why she confessed," she said. "She's been conditioned to take responsibility, to absorb blame, to believe that everything bad that happens is her fault. And if she didn't kill her father, then someone else did. And she's covering for them because that's what she was trained to do." "Do you know who killed Adrian?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, but I can tell you this. Adrian made a lot of enemies, parents who realized what he'd done to their children, colleagues who saw through his methods, and the Cordell Institute itself. Why would the Institute want him dead?" "Because he was a liability," she said. "The program was supposed to be discreet, controlled, but Adrian started getting sloppy. He kept files at home. He talked about his work in public forums. He was proud of what he'd done, and that made him dangerous." She stood. "If you're going to pursue this, you need to be careful. These people don't just bury evidence. They bury people." Before she left, I asked one more question. "The other children, Tyler, Sophia, Marcus, do you know where they are now?" She looked at me with something close to pity. "I tried to find them," she said. "After I left, I thought maybe I could help undo some of the damage. And I found nothing. No records, no addresses, no school enrollments. It's like they were wiped from existence. How is that possible? Money, influence, and parents who were paid to stay quiet." She adjusted her sunglasses. "If Eliza is the only one who survived this, then she's the only witness left. And the people who ran that program will do anything to make sure she never talks." I watched her walk away. Then I sat on that bench for a long time, staring at the fountain, trying to process what I'd just learned. Project Camden wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. And Eliza wasn't just a victim. She was evidence. Living, breathing evidence of a program that destroyed children in the name of science. I pulled out my phone and called my producer. I need everything you can find on the Cordell Institute, I said. Board members, funding sources, legal complaints, anything. What's going on, Carter? I'm not investigating a murder anymore, I said. I'm investigating a cover-up. That night, I got another anonymous email. No words, just an attachment, a scanned document, handwritten. It was a page from a notebook, Eliza's handwriting, and at the top, in neat, careful letters, "If I disappear, it's because I told the truth. Don't let them say I lied." Beneath it, a list of names: Tyler, Sophia, Marcus, Camden, and at the bottom, circled twice, Mom, 4 weeks. That's how long it took to convict an 11-year-old girl of murder. From arrest to sentencing, 28 days. Most murder trials take months, sometimes years. There are motions, appeals, delays. The legal system moves slowly, deliberately, because a person's life hangs in the balance. But Eliza Reed's trial was fast-tracked, almost like someone wanted it over with. I started going through the court. Transcripts again. This time, I wasn't looking at the evidence. I was looking at the process. The timeline was aggressive. March 14th. Adrian Reed is killed. Eliza is arrested. March 16th. Eliza is charged as an adult with first-degree murder. The district attorney's office holds a press conference. March 23rd. Preliminary hearing. The judge rules there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. April 2nd. Trial begins. April 10th. Verdict. Guilty. April 12th. Sentencing. Life without parole. 28 days. I called a defense attorney I knew, someone who specialized in juvenile cases. Her name was Patricia Yates. We'd worked together on a documentary 3 years earlier about wrongful convictions. She was sharp, thorough, and didn't pull punches. "Carter," she said when she answered, "please tell me you're not calling about another case where the system screwed up." I wish I wasn't. She sighed. "What is it this time?" "Eliza Reed." A pause. "The girl who killed her father?" "That's the one. I need you to look at the trial record. Tell me if you see what I'm seeing." "Which is?" "A rush job." Patricia agreed to review the case. 2 days later, she called me back. "You're right," she said. "This trial was a disaster. Tell me, where do I start? The defense was a joke. Eliza was represented by a public defender named Marcus Lowe. He's competent. I've worked with him before, but he was completely overwhelmed. He had 3 other cases running at the same time. He didn't have the resources or the time to mount a real defense. Did he request a continuance? Multiple times, and the judge denied every single one. Said the evidence was clear and there was no reason for delay. "But there was a reason," I said. "A child's life was on the line." "I know, but the judge," Marion Holbrook, is known for being tough on crime, especially violent crime. She saw a confession, physical evidence, and a motive. To her, it was open and shut. What about expert witnesses? Did the defense call anyone? One, a child psychologist named Dr. Emma Portman. She testified that Eliza showed signs of trauma and that her behavior could be consistent with abuse. But the prosecution tore her apart on cross-examination. They made her look like she was reaching, speculating. Was she? Maybe. But that's the problem. The defense didn't have time to build a proper case. They didn't have time to investigate. They just reacted to whatever the prosecution threw at them. Patricia paused. And the prosecution? They were prepared, extremely prepared. It's like they knew exactly what arguments the defense would make before they made them. I thought about that. The prosecution had been ready, almost too ready. Diana Thornton, the lead prosecutor, had presented a seamless case. Every piece of evidence fit together perfectly. Every witness supported the narrative. Every objection from the defense was anticipated and countered. It was efficient. Too efficient. I tracked down Marcus Lowe, Eliza's defense attorney. He agreed to meet me at his office, a cramped space above a dry cleaner, filled with stacks of files and a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. He was in his 50s, balding, exhausted. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said when I walked in. "Why?" "Because this case has haunted me for 2 years, and I knew someone would finally start asking the right questions." He gestured to a chair. I sat. "I failed that girl," he said bluntly. "I know I did, but I want you to understand something. I didn't have a choice." "What do you mean?" "The system was stacked against her from the beginning. The DA's office pushed for an adult trial. The judge agreed. I filed motions to have the case moved to juvenile court, but they were all denied. I requested a continuance so I could build a proper defense, but the judge said no. Every single motion I filed was denied. Why? Because they wanted it over fast. The media was all over it. The public was outraged. A child killing her father. It was a nightmare for optics. So the system did what it always does when it wants a problem to go away. It rushed." He rubbed his face. "I did the best I could with what I had. But I was one man with no resources, no time, and a client who wouldn't help herself." "What do you mean she wouldn't help herself?" "Eliza refused to fight. I told her we could argue self-defense. I told her we could bring in experts to talk about her mental state. But she wouldn't cooperate. She just kept saying, 'I did it, I killed him.'" He looked at me. "How do you defend someone who won't let you defend them?" I asked him about the prosecution. "Diana Thornton," he said with a bitter laugh. "She's good, one of the best prosecutors in the state. But this case? She was on another level. It's like she had every answer before I even asked the question." "Did anything about her approach strike you as unusual?" "Everything. She was too prepared, too confident, and she had access to resources I didn't. Expert witnesses, forensic analysts. She even had sealed medical records that I couldn't get access to. How did she get them? I don't know, but when I objected, the judge said they were relevant to the case and allowed them in." He leaned back in his chair. "The whole thing felt orchestrated, like someone had written the script before the trial even started. I left Marcus Lowe's office and went straight to the courthouse. I needed to see the judge. Marion Holbrook had retired 6 months after sentencing Eliza. She was 71 now, living in a modest house on the outskirts of town. I knocked on her door. She answered, looking older than I expected, thinner, tired. "Judge Holbrook?" I said. "I'm not a judge anymore," she said. "Just Marion. My name is Carter Williams. I'm working on a documentary about the Eliza Reed case. I was hoping you could answer a few questions." Her expression hardened. "I have nothing to say about that case. Please. I just need to understand why the trial moved so quickly." She started to close the door. "Marion," I said quickly, "I know you denied every motion for a continuance. I know you fast-tracked the trial. I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I just want to know why." She stopped. For a long moment she stood there, hand on the door, staring at me. Then she sighed. "Come in." We sat in her living room. She didn't offer me coffee, didn't make small talk, just folded her hands and looked at me. "That case destroyed me," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I sentenced a child to life in prison. Do you have any idea what that does to a person?" "Then why did you do it?" She looked away. "Because I was told to." I blinked. "Told to? By who?" "I can't say." "Marion, I can't," she said sharply. "I signed an agreement when I retired. If I violate it, I lose my pension, my benefits, everything." "Who made you sign it?" She didn't answer. "Marion, a child is sitting in prison right now for a crime I don't think she committed. If you know something—" "Of course I know something," she snapped. "I knew from the beginning that something was wrong with the case. The evidence was too clean, the timeline was too convenient, the confession was too perfect. Then why didn't you stop it?" "Because I was pressured. By the district attorney's office. By the state. by people I don't even know. They told me that this case needed to be resolved quickly, that it was in the best interest of the public, that dragging it out would only cause more harm. She looked at me with hollow eyes, and I believed them, because I was tired, because I was ready to retire, because I didn't want to fight anymore. So you just went along with it? Yes, she whispered, and I've regretted it every day since. I left Marion Holbrook's house feeling sick. The trial hadn't been about justice. It had been about containment. Someone had wanted Eliza convicted, fast, clean, final. And everyone involved, the judge, the prosecutor, even the defense attorney, had been pushed, pressured, or paid to make it happen. I pulled up Diana Thornton's contact information. I needed to talk to the prosecutor. Diana Thornton worked at the district attorney's office in a corner office with a view of the river. She was 46, sharp, professional, the kind of woman who didn't waste time on pleasantries. I called and asked for a meeting. She agreed, surprisingly. We met the next day. Mr. Williams, she said, shaking my hand. I've been expecting you. You have? Of course. You're making a documentary about the Reed case. People have been talking. She gestured for me to sit. What can I do for you? I want to know why you pushed so hard for a fast trial. She didn't flinch, because the evidence was overwhelming. A confession, physical evidence, motive. There was no reason to drag it out, except that the defendant was 11 years old, which is why we tried her as an adult, Diana said smoothly. Because the crime was adult in nature, premeditated, calculated, cold. Or, I said, because trying her as an adult meant the trial could move faster. Diana's smile didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Williams, I understand you're trying to find a different narrative. But sometimes the obvious answer is the right one. Eliza Reed killed her father. She confessed. She was convicted. That's justice. Is it? I leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were handed a case that was already solved. Like someone gave you everything you needed to win before the trial even started. Her expression hardened. I don't like what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking, who told you to move fast? No one told me anything. Then why did you seal Adrian Reed's medical records? Why did you fight every continuance? Why did you refuse to allow certain witnesses? Diana stood. This meeting is over. You're protecting someone, I said, and I'm going to find out who. She walked to the door and opened it. Good luck with that, Mr. Williams. I left the DA's office and sat in my car for a long time. Everyone involved in this case had been compromised. The judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorney. And now all of them were hiding behind NDAs, agreements, and fear. But there was one person who hadn't been silenced. Eliza. She was still alive, still in prison, and if I could talk to her, maybe I could finally get the truth. Getting permission to interview Eliza took 3 weeks. The prison administration stonewalled me at first. My requests were denied without explanation. My calls went unreturned. It wasn't until I got a lawyer involved, threatened to file a First Amendment claim, that they finally relented. But there were conditions. No cameras, no recording devices, 30 minutes. One guard in the room at all times. I accepted. The Redwood Correctional Facility was 2 hours north of the city. A sprawling complex of concrete and razor wire surrounded by flat, empty fields. I arrived early, went through security, surrendered my phone, my wallet, my keys. They searched me twice. Then they led me down a long hallway. White walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of bleach and something else I couldn't identify, to a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. I sat down and waited. When the door opened, I barely recognized her. Eliza Reed was 13 now, taller than I expected, thinner. Her hair, once neat and carefully styled, was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She wore an orange jumpsuit that was too big for her. Her face was blank, empty. She looked at me, with those same pale gray eyes I'd seen in the courtroom footage. But there was something different now. She looked older, worn, like the girl she'd been had disappeared completely. A guard stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. Eliza sat down across from me, folded her hands on the table, the same way she had during the interrogation, during the trial. "You're the one making the documentary," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I think something's wrong with your case." She didn't react. "A lot of people think that," she said. "But it doesn't matter. I confessed. I was convicted. It's over." "Is it?" She looked at me for a long moment. "What do you want from me, Mr. Williams?" "The truth." "I already told the truth. I killed my father." "Did you?" Her jaw tightened, just slightly. "Yes." "Then help me understand something," I said. "The timeline doesn't make sense." I pulled out a notebook, laid it on the table. "According to the police report, you called 911 at 11:43 p.m. You told the operator your father was dead. Police arrived at 11:51 p.m. But your neighbor, Margaret Finch, heard gunshots at 11:20 p.m. That's a 23-minute gap." Eliza stared at the notebook. "What were you doing for 23 minutes, Eliza?" "I don't remember." "You don't remember? Or you won't say?" She looked up at me. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear. "I was in shock," she said carefully. "I wasn't thinking. Isn't clearly. The police report says you were calm when they arrived, sitting on the porch, no signs of distress. If you were in shock, why were you so composed?" "I don't know." "And the gun," I continued. "The forensic report says there were secondary fingerprints on the weapon. Not yours. Not your father's. Someone else touched that gun, Eliza." "Who?" "I don't know." "Margaret Finch says she saw someone leave the house that night. A figure walking down the driveway, getting into a car." "Who was it?" "I don't know." "Eliza." "I don't know." Her voice cracked, just slightly. The first real emotion I'd seen from her. The guard shifted, took a step forward. Eliza looked down at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was back to that flat, controlled tone. "I shot my father. I called the police. I told them what I did. That's all that happened." I leaned back in my chair. "You're lying." She didn't look up. "You're protecting someone," I said, "and I think I know who." Her hands tightened, knuckles white. "I want to help you, Eliza, but I can't do that unless you tell me the truth." "The truth doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because no one will believe it." I pulled out a photograph, the one from the trial. Eliza in the courtroom, hands folded, face blank. "Do you remember this moment?" I asked. She glanced at it, looked away. "You smiled," I said. "Right after the judge sentenced you to life in prison. You smiled. Why?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw something real behind her eyes. Not anger, not defiance, resignation. "Because it was over," she said quietly. "What was over?" "Everything." The guard cleared his throat. 5 minutes. I had to make this count. "Eliza, I know about Project Camden." Her entire body went rigid. "I know what your father was doing. I know about the Cordell Institute. I know about the other children, Tyler, Sophia, Marcus." Her breathing quickened. "And I know," I said slowly, "that you weren't just his daughter. You were part of the program." She closed her eyes. "I can't talk about this." "Why not?" "Because if I do, they'll know." "Who?" "The people who funded it, the people who protected him, the people who are still out there." She opened her eyes, looked at me. "You think I'm in here because I killed my father? I'm in here because it's the only place they can't reach me." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You're saying you confessed to protect yourself?" "I'm saying I confessed because it was the only option I had." "Eliza, if someone else killed your father, it doesn't matter who killed him," she said. "What matters is that he's dead, and the program is buried with him. But it's not buried. The Cordell Institute still exists. The people who ran Camden are still out there. And if you don't tell the truth, they'll do it again. She shook her head. You don't understand. These people don't just destroy evidence. They destroy people. My mother tried to speak out, and now she's gone. Camden tried to fight back, and now Camden's gone. Anyone who gets too close disappears. Then let me help you. You can't. Why not? Because, she said, her voice breaking, I'm already dead. I just haven't stopped breathing yet. The guard stepped forward. Time's up. Eliza stood. Wait, I said, just tell me one thing. Who pulled the trigger? She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might actually answer. But then she said, I did, and she walked out. I sat in that room for a long time after she left, replaying the conversation in my head. I'm in here because it's the only place they can't reach me. She wasn't protecting someone. She was protecting herself. By taking the blame by going to prison, she'd removed herself from the equation. She'd made herself untouchable. But that meant someone else was still out there. Someone who had killed Adrian Reed. Someone Eliza was terrified of. I drove back to the city in silence. My mind raced. The timeline, the fingerprints, the figure Margaret saw leaving the house. And then it hit me. I'd been asking the wrong question. I'd been asking who killed Adrian Reed. But the real question was, who was Adrian Reed meeting with that night? I pulled over, grabbed my laptop from the back seat, started going through Adrian's calendar, his emails, his phone records, and there it was, buried in his schedule from March 14th, 8 p.m., home visit, TRTR. Not a patient, not a colleague, a code. I cross-referenced it with everything I had, the list of names from Eliza's notebook, the files Dr. Brenner had mentioned, the Cordell Institute's records. And I found it. Tyler Reeves, one of the children from Project Camden. I searched for Tyler Reeves, found a birth certificate, school records, but nothing recent. No current address, no social media, no employment, just like the others. Erased. But then I found something else. A police report. March 15th, the day after Adrian's murder. A domestic disturbance call. A house 20 minutes from Adrian's. Officers responded. Found a woman in distress. A teenage boy locked in a bedroom. No charges filed. Case closed. The woman's name, Linda Reeves. Tyler's mother. I had an address. I drove straight there. The house was small, run down, peeling paint, overgrown yard. I knocked. No answer. I knocked. Again. Harder. Finally, the door cracked open. A woman peered out. 40s. Exhausted. Eyes red like she'd been crying. Linda Reeves? I said. She started to close the door. Wait, I said quickly. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm investigating Adrian Reed's death. I think your son was there. That night. She froze. I don't know what you're talking about. Please, I just need to know what happened. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she opened the door. Linda's living room was dark, curtains drawn. The air smelled stale. She sat on the couch, didn't offer me a seat. Tyler was in that program, she said quietly. Camden. Adrian told me it would help him, that he'd be better. And for a while it seemed like it worked. What changed? Tyler changed. He stopped talking to me, stopped eating. He'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming, and when I asked him what was wrong, he'd just say, I can't tell you. He said, I can't tell you. She wiped her eyes. I pulled him out of the program, told Adrian we were done, but Adrian wouldn't let it go. He kept calling, kept showing up at the house. He said Tyler needed to finish the program or there would be consequences. What kind of consequences? He didn't say, but Tyler was terrified. So I agreed to let him go back. One last session, March 14th. My blood ran cold. Tyler was at Adrian's house that night. Linda nodded. I drove him there at 8 p.m. Adrian said it would take 2 hours, that I should come back at 10 Nastai to pick him up. Did you? I came back early, around 9:30. I had a bad feeling. And when I got there, I saw Tyler running out of the house. He was crying, shaking. He got in the car and he just kept saying, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." She looked at me. I didn't know what he was talking about. I thought maybe Adrian had yelled at him. So I took him home, and then the next morning the police showed up at my door. What did they say? They said Adrian Reed was dead, that they were investigating. They asked if Tyler had been there that night. What? Did you tell them? I lied, she whispered. I told them no. I said Tyler had been home all night, and they believed me. Where's Tyler now? I asked. She didn't answer. Linda, he's gone. What do you mean, gone? 2 days after Adrian died, someone came to the house. A man in a suit, he said. Tyler needed help, that he needed to be in a facility where he could be monitored for his own safety. And you let him go? I didn't have a choice, she cried. He said if I didn't cooperate, Tyler would be charged as an accomplice. He said my son would go to prison. Who was he? I don't know. He didn't give me his name. He just said he was with the Institute. The Cordell Institute. They'd taken Tyler, erased him, just like the others. I left Linda Reeves's house with a pit in my stomach. Tyler had been there that night. He'd been in Adrian's house. And something had happened, something that sent him running, terrified, saying I didn't mean to. And then the Cordell Institute had made him disappear. I needed to find those files. The ones Adrian kept. The ones Rebecca Marsh said had been stolen from his office. The ones that documented everything. Project Camden, the other children. The methods he'd used. If I could find them, I'd have proof. I started with Adrian's house. The place was still empty, still for sale. I called the real estate agent listed on the sign, told her I was interested in viewing the property. She agreed to meet me the next day. The agent was young, mid-20s. Overly cheerful in that forced way people get when they're trying to sell something no one wants. It's a great property, she said as she unlocked the front door. Lots of potential. Just needs a little love. I nodded absently. I wasn't here to buy a house. She led me inside. The air was stale. Dust covered everything. The furniture was still there, frozen in time. A couch, a coffee table, bookshelves lining the walls. The owner's estate hasn't cleared it out yet, the agent said. But that could actually work to your advantage. You'd get a fully furnished home. Can I look round? I asked. Of course, take your time. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, climbed the stairs to the second floor. Eliza's room was at the end of the hall. I opened the door. It was small, neat. A twin bed with a plain white comforter, a desk, a bookshelf filled with novels and textbooks. Everything was organized, precise. There were no posters on the walls, no photos, no personal touches. It looked like a hotel room. I walked to the window, the one Rebecca had mentioned, the one where Eliza used to stand for hours. I looked out at the street below, at the neighbors. Houses, at the empty driveway. What had she been looking at? What had she been waiting for? I moved to Adrian's office. It was on the first floor, tucked behind the kitchen. The door was closed. I hesitated, then opened it. The room was dark. Heavy curtains blocked the sunlight. I flipped the switch. A single overhead light flickered on. The office was larger than I expected. A heavy wooden desk sat in the center. Filing cabinets lined one wall. Bookshelves lined another. Everything was still there, untouched. I started with the desk. The drawers were locked. I pulled out a pocket knife. Jimmied the lock. It popped open. Inside, pens, paper clips, old receipts, nothing useful. I moved to the filing cabinets, also locked. I worked the lock until it gave. Pulled open the top drawer. Empty. Every drawer, every cabinet, cleaned out. Someone had already been here. Someone had taken everything. I stood in the middle of the office, staring at the empty cabinets. Rebecca said files had been stolen. But when? Before the police arrived? After? And who had taken them? I noticed something on the far wall. A faint outline, rectangular, like something had been hanging there and was recently removed. I walked over, ran my hand along the wall. There was a seam, a hidden panel. I pressed on it. Nothing. I pushed harder, felt it give slightly. I slid my fingers along the edge, found a small latch, and pulled. The panel swung open. Behind it, a safe. My heart raced. I tried the handle. Locked. I pulled out my phone, called a locksmith I knew. Told him I'd pay double if he came immediately and didn't ask questions. He arrived 30 minutes later. It took him 10 minutes to crack the safe. Inside, a single external hard drive. I thanked the locksmith, paid him in cash. Waited until he left. Then I grabbed the hard drive and got the hell out of there. Back at my apartment, I connected the hard drive to my laptop. It was encrypted. Of course it was. I spent 2 hours trying to crack it. Failed. I called a tech consultant I'd worked with on previous projects, someone who knew how to get around these things. She agreed to help. It took her 6 hours, but she got in. The hard drive contained hundreds of files, audio recordings, video footage, scanned documents, spreadsheets, all labeled with codes, dates, subject numbers. I opened the first video file. The footage was grainy, shot from a fixed camera in what looked like Adrian's office. A child sat in a chair, maybe 8 or 9 years old. The timestamp read, June 2017. Adrian's voice came from off-camera. "How are you feeling today?" The child didn't answer. "We've talked about this," Adrian said calmly. "You need to use your words." "I'm fine," the child said quietly. "Are you?" A pause. "Yes." "Good. Let's try the exercise again. I'm going to say a phrase and you're going to repeat it. Ready?" The child nodded. "I am in control. I am in control," the child repeated. "I am responsible. I am responsible. I am enough. I am enough." The phrases continued, over and over, for 20 minutes. By the end, the child's voice was flat, mechanical, and Adrian's voice remained perfectly calm. I closed the file, opened another, same setup, different child, different date, same phrases, same calm, controlled tone from Adrian. I opened a third file, a fourth, a fifth. Every single one followed the same pattern. Repetition, conditioning, breaking down resistance until the child became compliant. I found a folder labeled Subject E, Eliza. I opened the first file. The timestamp read, January 2018. Eliza was younger, maybe 9 years old. She sat in the same chair, same camera angle. Adrian's voice. "Eliza, do you understand why we're doing this?" "Yes." "Tell me." "Because I need to be better." "That's right. And what happens if you're not better?" A pause. "Bad things happen." "And whose fault is that?" Another pause, longer. "Mine." "Good." I felt sick. This wasn't therapy. This was abuse, systematic, calculated, documented. I kept watching. In video after video, Adrian broke Eliza down, made her repeat phrases, made her internalize blame, made her believe that everything bad that happened was her responsibility. And in every video, she became more and more empty. By the final recording, dated February 2020, she was barely recognizable. Her face was blank. Her voice was flat. Her eyes were hollow. She had become exactly what Adrian wanted, a perfect subject. I found another folder labeled Project Camden, Final Report. I opened it. It was a detailed document, 50 pages, outlining the entire program, the methodology, the results, the success rate, and at the end, a conclusion. Subject E demonstrated the highest level of compliance and adaptability. Conditioning was complete. Subject is ready for Phase 2. Phase 2. What the hell was Phase 2? I scrolled through the rest of the files, found recordings of the other children, Tyler, Sophia, Marcus, Subject C, Camden. Each one showed the same progression, compliance, obedience, erasure. But Camden's file was different. The recording stopped abruptly, halfway through. The final entry was a handwritten note scanned into the system. Subject C unresponsive to conditioning. Extreme resistance. Recommend termination of participation. Family to be compensated for silence. Termination of participation. Camden hadn't disappeared because the program succeeded. Camden had disappeared because the program failed. I leaned back in my chair. This was bigger than I thought. Adrian hadn't just been conducting unethical research. He'd been systematically destroying children. And when one of them fought back, when one of them resisted, they were removed, erased, paid off into silence, and the Cordell Institute had funded it all. I found one more file, audio only, no label, just a timestamp, March 14th, 11:07 p.m., the night of the murder. I hit play. The audio was muffled, as distant, like it had been recorded from another room. Adrian's voice, "You shouldn't be here." A younger voice, male, shaking. "You said if I finished the program it would stop. You said I'd be better. You are better, Tyler. You're stronger now." "I'm not. I can't sleep. I can't think. I hear your voice in my head all the time, telling me what to do, what to think. That's because you're not finished yet. You need to trust the process." "I don't want to trust it anymore. I want it to stop." A pause. "Tyler, you need to calm down." "No, you did this to me. You broke me." The sound of something crashing. A struggle. Adrian's voice louder now. "Tyler, put that down. You don't get to control me anymore." 2 gunshots. Silence. Then faintly a child's voice. Eliza's voice. "Tyler." Footsteps. Running. The recording ended. I sat frozen. Tyler had pulled the trigger. Not Eliza. Tyler had killed Adrian Reed. And Eliza had been there. She'd witnessed it. But instead of telling the truth, she'd taken the blame. Because that's what she'd been conditioned to do. To absorb responsibility. To protect others. To never resist. I copied every file from the hard drive onto a secure cloud server. Backed it up in 3 different locations. Then I sat down and started writing. This wasn't just a documentary anymore. This was evidence. Evidence of abuse, of conspiracy, of a system that sacrificed children to protect powerful institutions. I didn't know where Tyler was, but I knew. One thing. If the Cordell Institute had taken him, they weren't trying to help him. They were trying to bury him. Just like they'd buried Camden. Just like they'd buried the truth. But Eliza was still alive. And if I could get this evidence in front of the right people, maybe, just maybe, I could free her. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, headphones on, listening to that audio recording over and over. Tyler's voice. Desperate. Broken. "You did this to me. You broke me." The gunshots. The silence. And then Eliza's voice. Small. Frightened. Tyler. She had been there. She had seen. Everything. And instead of telling the truth, she had walked to the front porch, sat down in her father's blood, and waited for the police. And when they asked her what happened, she said, "I killed my father." But why? Why would she take the blame for Tyler? I thought about what Dr. Brenner had said about conditioning, about children being trained to absorb responsibility, to internalize blame. Eliza had spent her entire life being told that everything was her fault, that she was responsible, that she had to be better. And when Adrian died, when Tyler finally fought back, Eliza did exactly what she'd been programmed to do. She took the blame. I needed to prove it. The audio recording was evidence. But it wasn't enough. Defense attorneys could argue it was out of context, that it had been edited, that it didn't prove anything. I needed more. I needed to show that Eliza's confession had been coerced, fabricated, fed to her by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate her. I went back to the interrogation video. This time, I watched it with fresh eyes, looking for something I'd missed, and I found it. At the 32-minute mark, Detective Callahan asked Eliza a question. "Why did you shoot your father twice?" Eliza paused, just for a second. Then she said, "Because I wanted to make sure he was dead." But that wasn't true. The autopsy report showed that Adrian had been shot in the chest first. A fatal wound. He would have died within minutes. The second shot to the head came after. It was overkill, rage, desperation. Not the action of a calculated 11-year-old. It was the action of someone who had been pushed to their breaking point. Someone like Tyler. But there was something else. Something about the way Eliza answered that question. Her voice had shifted, just slightly, from flat and mechanical to something softer, uncertain, like she was repeating something she'd been told to say. I rewound the video, watched it again, and then I saw it. At the 30-minute mark, 2 minutes before Callahan asked that question, the camera angle shifted slightly, like someone had bumped the tripod, and in the background, just barely visible in the reflection of the two-way mirror, I saw a figure, someone standing on the other side of the glass, watching. I zoomed in, enhanced the image as much as I could. The figure was tall, male, wearing a suit. I couldn't make out the face, but I could see his posture, his stance. He wasn't just observing, he was directing. I called Detective Callahan. It took me 3 days to track him down. He'd retired 6 months after Eliza's trial, moved out of state. When I finally got him on the phone, he was defensive. "I don't talk about closed cases," he said. "This case isn't closed," I replied. "Not really. And I think you know that." A pause. "What do you want?" "I want to know who was in the observation room during Eliza's interrogation." Silence. "Detective Callahan, I can't talk about this." "Why not?" "Because I was told not to." "Told by who?" He hung up. I called back. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. "Detective, I have evidence that Eliza Reed's confession was coerced. I have audio of the actual murder. And I know there was someone in that observation room feeding her." Answers. "If you don't talk to me, I'm going to take this to the press. And when the truth comes out, you're going to be implicated." He called me back 10 minutes later. "Meet me tomorrow," he said. "Noon. The diner on 5th Street. Come alone." The diner was nearly empty. A few truckers, an elderly couple, a waitress who looked like she'd been working there for decades. Callahan was sitting in the back booth. He looked older than I expected, grayer, thinner, like the weight of something had been eating away at him. I slid into the seat across from him. "You shouldn't be doing this," he said, quietly. "Doing what?" "Digging into this case. It's dangerous." "Why?" He looked down at his coffee. "Because the people involved don't want the truth to come out, and they have the power to make sure it doesn't." "Who are they?" He didn't answer. "Detective, there was someone in the observation room," he said finally. "A consultant. That's what they told us. Said he was an expert in child psychology, that he'd been brought in to help with the interrogation." "What was his name?" "I don't remember." "You're lying." He looked at me. His eyes were tired, haunted. "I'm protecting myself," he said. "And if you're smart, you'll stop asking questions and walk away." "I can't do that." "Then you're going to end up like the others." "What others?" He stood, threw a 20 on the table. "The ones who tried to expose what Adrian Reed was really doing. They're all gone now, one way or another. One way or, ooh." He walked out. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty seat across from me. Callahan was scared. And if he was scared, that meant the people behind this were still active, still watching, still covering their tracks. I went back to my apartment and pulled up everything I had on the Cordell. Institute, board members, investors, associates, and then I found him, Dr. Julian Vance, a clinical psychologist, former director of the Cordell Institute's research division. He'd resigned in 2020, 3 months after Adrian's death. I searched for him, found a current address, a private practice. In the city. I called, left a message. He called back 2 hours later. Mr. Williams, he said. His voice was smooth, controlled. I understand you've been asking questions about Project Camden. I have. Then we should talk, but not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow evening? My office. 7 p.m. I'll be there. Come alone, he said. And Mr. Williams, be very careful, you're treading in dangerous territory. He hung up. I didn't trust him, but I needed answers. The next evening I arrived at Vance's office, a sleek building downtown, all glass and steel. I took the elevator to the 12th floor, found his office at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The office was dark, no lights on. Dr. Vance, I called. No answer. I stepped inside, reached for the light switch, and then I heard a voice behind me. You should have listened to Callahan. I spun. Round. A man stood in the doorway, tall, suit, the same figure I'd seen in the reflection during Eliza's interrogation. Who are you? I asked. He smiled. Someone who's very interested in making sure your documentary never sees the light of day. He stepped into the room, closed the door behind him. You've been very persistent, Mr. Williams. Admirable, really, but also foolish. Where's Vance? Dr. Vance won't be joining us. He's indisposed. My heart raced. What do you want? I want you to stop, delete your files, abandon your project, forget you ever heard the name Eliza Reed. And if I don't? He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder, tossed it on the desk. Then I'll make sure you regret it. I opened the folder. Inside, photos of me, my apartment, my car, my family, a threat. You've done good work, the man said. But this story ends here. Eliza confessed. She was convicted. The case is closed. If you try to reopen it, you'll only hurt yourself and the people you care about. I looked up at him. Who are you working for? He smiled again. People who prefer to remain anonymous. People who have invested a great deal of time and money into ensuring that certain truths stay buried. The Cordell Institute, among others. He turned to leave. One more thing, Mr. Williams. That hard drive you found, it's encrypted, backed up, secure. But technology has a way of failing. Fires happen, servers crash, data gets corrupted. He looked back at me. It would be a shame if all your evidence just disappeared. And then he was gone. I stood there shaking. They knew. They knew about the hard drive, about the recordings, about everything, and they were threatening me. But I wasn't going to stop. I left Vance's office and went straight to a secure location, a storage facility I'd rented under a fake name. I made 3 additional copies of the hard drive, mailed one to a lawyer I trusted, hid another in a safety deposit box, and then I called my producer. We're moving up the timeline, I said. I need this documentary finished in 2 weeks. And I need it released everywhere, simultaneously, no delays, no second chances. Carter, what's going on? I'm being threatened, and if I don't get this story out fast, it's going to disappear, along with me. The next 2 weeks were a blur. I barely slept, barely ate. I locked myself in my apartment and worked around the clock, cutting footage, reviewing audio, building the narrative piece by piece. Every time I heard a noise in the hallway, I froze. Every time my phone rang from an unknown number, my heart raced. I was being watched. I knew it, but I couldn't stop now. 3 days into the work, I received an email. No subject line, just an attachment. I hesitated, scanned it for viruses, opened it. It was a PDF, a scanned document. The header read, Cordell Institute, Internal Memorandum, March 16, 2020, 2 days after Adrian's murder. I read it. To Board of Directors. From Vincent Halloway, Legal Counsel. RE. Containment Protocol. Project Camden. Summary: Dr. Adrian Reed was killed on the evening of March 14th. Initial reports indicate involvement of Subject T, Tyler Reeves, who was present at the residence during a scheduled session. Subject E, Eliza Reed, was also present and has provided a full confession to local authorities. claiming sole responsibility for the homicide. Recommendation: allows Subject E's confession to proceed through the judicial system without interference. Her conviction will effectively close all public inquiries into Dr. Reed's work. Relocate Subject T to Secure Facility 7 for observation and continued conditioning. Family has been compensated and will not pursue further legal action. Seal all files related to Project Camden. Destroy physical records. Encrypt digital archives. Monitor all individuals with knowledge of the project, see attached list, and ensure compliance with existing NDAs. Approved. Executive Committee, Cordell Institute. I sat back, staring at the screen. They had orchestrated everything. They had let Eliza take the blame, allowed her to be convicted, used her as a scapegoat to bury the entire program. And Tyler, the real killer, had been taken, hidden away, silenced. But who sent me this document? I checked the email address. Anonymous, untraceable. Someone inside the institute was leaking information. Someone who wanted the truth to come out. I kept working. I reached out to everyone. I'd interviewed, asked for final statements on the record. Most refused. Margaret Finch wouldn't return my calls. Marcus Lowe, the defense attorney, said he couldn't comment further. Dr. Natalie Brenner sent me a one-line email. I've said all I can. Please don't contact me again. Even Linda Reeves stopped answering her phone. They were all scared. But then I got a call from an unexpected source, Judge Marion Holbrook. "Mr. Williams," she said when I answered, "I've been thinking about our conversation. And I want to go on the record." I sat up. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted. "But I can't live with this anymore. I sentenced a child to life in prison because I was told to. And every day since, I've wondered if I made the right choice. I don't think I did. What do you want to say?" She took a breath. "I want to say that I was pressured. That the district attorney's office, the state, and others made it very clear that this case needed to be resolved quickly and quietly. I was told that dragging it out would only cause more harm, that the evidence was overwhelming, that there was no point in delaying justice." "Who told you that?" "I can't name names, but I can tell you this. The people involved were not just local officials. They had connections, power, and they made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, there would be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that end careers." I recorded her statement, added it to the documentary. It was explosive. A sitting judge and now retired, admitting that the trial had been rigged. But I needed more. I needed someone from the prosecution to talk. I tried calling Diana Thornton again. This time, she answered. "Mr. Williams," she said coolly, "I was wondering when you'd call again. I need to talk to you. On the record. I have nothing to say. I have evidence that Eliza Reed's confession was coerced, that she didn't kill her father, that the real killer was taken by the Cordell Institute and hidden away." Silence. "Miss Thornton? I'm still here. Will you talk to me?" Another long "No," she said finally. "But I'll tell you this. Be very careful. You're not the first person to try to expose what happened, and the others, they didn't succeed. What happened to them? They disappeared, or they were discredited, or they had accidents." Her voice dropped. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Williams, and the people you're up against don't play fair." She hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, heart pounding. They disappeared, or they were discredited, or they had accidents. How many people had tried to tell this story before me? How many had been silenced? I kept digging. I found 3 cases. 3 journalists who had written about the Cordell Institute over the years. Case 1, 2017. A reporter named Jessica Dalton wrote an expose about unethical research practices at Cordell. The article was published online. 2 weeks later, she issued a retraction, claiming her sources had been unreliable. She left journalism shortly after. Case 2, 2019. A local news anchor named Brian Kemper did a segment on Project Camden after a parent filed a complaint. The segment aired once, then it was pulled. Kemper was fired for fabricating sources. He never worked. In media, again. Case 3, 2021. A documentary filmmaker named Rachel Ortiz started investigating Adrian Reed's death. She interviewed witnesses, gathered evidence, and began production. 3 months into the project, she was killed in a car accident. The project was never completed. I stared at Tao. Rachel's name, a car accident. Convenient. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. I doubled down on security, hired a private investigator to sweep my apartment for bugs, changed my passwords, used encrypted communication, and I kept working. Then one night I received a package. No return. Address. Just my name and address written in neat handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside, a USB drive and a note. This is everything. Use it and be safe. I plugged the USB into my laptop. It contained hundreds of files, internal emails, financial records, meeting minutes, all from the Cordell Institute. I started reading. The emails were damning. Board members discussing damage control after Adrian's death, financial transfers to Linda Reeves and other parents, encrypted communications about relocating problematic subjects, and a series of emails between Vincent Holloway and a man named Douglas Mercer, CEO of the Cordell Institute. One email stood out, from Douglas Mercer to Vincent Holloway, date March 18, 2020. Subject, Reed situation. Vincent, the girl's confession is holding. The press is satisfied. Local authorities are moving forward with the conviction. This should close the matter permanently. However, I'm concerned about loose ends. The mother, Miranda Reed, has been unreachable. Subject T's family is cooperating, but I recommend continued monitoring. Also, there's a journalist asking questions. Carter Williams. He's been contacting former employees and requesting records. I want him handled. Quietly. Let's discuss options tomorrow. DM. I read the email again. I want him handled. Quietly. They had been planning to silence me from the beginning, but they hadn't succeeded. Because someone inside the organization, someone with access to these files, was fighting back. Someone who wanted the truth to come out. I incorporated the emails into the documentary, redacted names where necessary, but left enough detail to show the scope of the conspiracy. The Cordell Institute had funded Project Camden. They had allowed Adrian Reed to experiment on children. And when Adrian was killed, they had orchestrated a cover-up, using an 11-year-old girl as a scapegoat to protect their reputation and their funding. The documentary was almost finished. But there was one more person I needed to talk to. Miranda Reed, Eliza's mother. I'd tried find her before, but she disappeared, gone off the grid. But now, with the files from the USB drive, I had more information. Financial records showing payments made to a woman named M. Faulkner, Miranda's maiden name. The payments had been sent to an account in a small town 2 states away. I had an address. I drove there the next day. The town was tiny, population 3,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. The address led me to a small house on the edge of town, run down, overgrown yard, curtains drawn. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Finally, the door opened. Crack. A woman peered out, mid-40s, thin, hollow-eyed, Miranda Reed. "I'm not talking to you," she said immediately. "Please," I said. "I'm trying to help your daughter." "You can't help her. No one can." "Miranda, I have evidence. I have recordings. I have emails. I can prove that Eliza didn't kill Adrian, but I need your help." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she opened the door. Inside, the house was sparse, a couch, a small kitchen table, no personal touches, no photos. Miranda sat down, wrapping her arms around herself. "I can't talk about this," she said quietly. "I signed an NDA. If I say anything, they'll come after me." "They're already coming after me," I said. "But I'm not stopping, and I need you to tell me what happened. Why did you leave Eliza?" She closed her eyes. "Because Adrian threatened me," she whispered. He said if I tried to fight him for custody, he'd destroy me. He had files, records. He said he'd prove I was unfit, that I'd never see her again. So you walked away? I didn't have a choice, she said, tears streaming down her face. He was too powerful, too connected, and I was terrified. Did you know about Project Camden? She nodded. I found out toward the end of our marriage. I saw the way he treated her, the conditioning, the control. I tried to get her out, but he fought back, and he won. She looked at me. I've been running ever since, because I knew if I stayed, if I said anything, they'd make me disappear. Who's they? The Institute, Adrian's colleagues, people with money and power who didn't want the program exposed. Miranda, I said carefully, will you go on the record? Will you tell the world what Adrian did to Eliza? She hesitated. If I do that, they'll kill me. Maybe, I said. But if you don't, Eliza stays in prison for the rest of her life, and the people who destroyed her get away with it. She was silent for a long time. Then she nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Miranda's testimony changed everything. I recorded her statement over 2 hours. She spoke slowly, carefully, reliving memories she'd spent years trying to forget. She talked about the early years of her marriage, how Adrian had seemed brilliant, compassionate, dedicated to helping children. But then she saw the other side. He started bringing his work home, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. At first it was just notes, files, but then he converted the basement into a second office. He'd take Eliza down there for hours. I wasn't allowed in. He said it was father-daughter time. What was he doing to her? I asked. Conditioning her. I didn't realize it at first, but I started. Noticing changes. She stopped crying when she got hurt, stopped asking for things. She became obedient, too obedient. Miranda wiped her eyes. One night I heard her talking in her sleep. She was repeating phrases. I am responsible. I am in control. I will not fail. Over and over, like a mantra. Did you confront him? I tried. He told me I didn't understand the science, that he was helping her develop resilience, emotional regulation. He made it sound so reasonable. But you didn't believe him. No, because I could see what it was doing to her. She was disappearing, the little girl I knew, the one who laughed, who asked questions, who had opinions. She was being erased. Miranda told me about the day she decided to leave. I found a notebook in his office. It had names, children's names, and next to each name there were notes, observations, progress reports. It read, like an experiment log. Did you see Eliza's name? Yes, and underneath he'd written, Subject E shows optimal compliance, ready for advanced protocols. She looked at me. That's when I knew I had to get her out. So I filed for divorce. I filed for full custody, and I told the court what he was doing. What happened? He fought back hard. He had lawyers, experts. He painted me as unstable, paranoid. He said I was projecting my own mental health issues onto him. Her voice cracked. And the court believed him. They gave him full custody, no visitation. They told me if I continued to make unfounded accusations, I'd be held in contempt. So you gave up? I didn't give up, she said fiercely. I was silenced. There's a difference. After the divorce was finalized, she continued, Adrian's lawyer contacted me. He offered me money, a lot of money, in exchange for signing an NDA and disappearing. Did you take it? She nodded, shame written across her face. I took it because I was broke, because I was scared, because I thought maybe if I stayed away he'd stop, that he'd leave her alone. But he didn't. No, he escalated, and I couldn't do anything about it, because I'd signed away my right to speak. Miranda, I said gently, do you know what happened the night Adrian died? She shook her head. I didn't find out until weeks later. Someone called me, anonymous, told me Adrian was dead and Eliza had been arrested. Did you try to help her? I tried to contact her lawyer, but he wouldn't return my calls. I tried to visit her in jail. They denied my request. I was told that because I'd given up my parental rights, I had no legal standing. She looked down at her hands. I've lived with that guilt every day since. I should have fought harder. I should found a way. You're fighting now, I said. I asked her one final question. Do you believe Eliza killed her father? Miranda looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. No, she said, because I know my daughter, and I know what Adrian did to her. He conditioned her to take blame, to absorb responsibility, to believe that everything bad that happens is her fault. She paused. If Eliza confessed, it's because she thought it was the right thing to do, not because she did it. I left Miranda's house with her full testimony. It was powerful, devastating, but I needed one more thing. I needed to prove beyond any doubt that Tyler had been in that house, that he had pulled the trigger, and I knew where to find that proof. I went back to the prison. I needed to see Eliza again. This time, the warden denied my request. Ms. Reed has declined your visit, he said. Did she say why? She said she has nothing more to say to you. I wasn't surprised. Eliza had been conditioned to stay silent, to protect others. Even now, locked away, she was still following the programming. But I had to try. I wrote her a letter. Dear Eliza, I know you've been told to stay quiet. I know you've been conditioned to believe that speaking out will only make things worse. But I need you to know something. I have evidence, audio recordings, emails, testimony from your mother. I know Tyler was there that night. I know he killed your father. And I know you took the blame because that's what you were trained to do. But you don't have to protect him anymore. Tyler is gone, taken by the same people who destroyed your childhood. And the only way to stop them is to tell the truth. You have spent your entire life taking responsibility for things that weren't your fault. But this time you have a choice. You can stay silent, or you can speak. Please, Eliza, let me help you. Carter, I sent the letter through the prison system, and I waited. 3 days later, I received a response. A single sentence, written in neat handwriting. Check the security footage from March 14th, 11:15 p.m. The camera in the driveway. I called the police department immediately. Asked to speak with Detective Mendez, Callahan's former partner. She was still active, still working cases. She agreed to meet me. We met at a coffee shop. She was in her 40s now, graying hair, tired eyes. You're making a lot of noise, Mr. Williams, she said. I'm trying to find the truth. The truth is that Eliza Reed confessed. She was convicted. The case is closed. Is it? I pulled out my phone, played the audio recording. Tyler's voice, the gunshots, Eliza's voice. Mendez listened in silence. When it ended, she sat back. Where did you get that? From Adrian Reed's files, the ones that were supposed to be destroyed. She didn't say anything for a long time. Detective, I said. Eliza told me to check the security footage. The driveway camera, March 14th, 11:15 p.m. Do you still have it? I don't know. That was 2 years ago. Most footage gets deleted after. Please, just check. She sighed. I'll look, but I'm not promising anything. 2 days later, she called me. I found it, she said. And? You need to see this. We met at the station. She led me to a small room with a computer. Pulled up. The footage. The timestamp read, March 14th, 2020, 11:15 p.m. The camera showed the front of Adrian's house, the driveway, the porch. At 11:16, the front door opened. A figure emerged. Young, male, wearing a hoodie. Tyler. He ran down the driveway, stumbling, looking back over his shoulder. A car was parked at the curb. He got in. The car drove away. That's not Eliza, Mendez said quietly. No, it's not. Who is it? Tyler Reeves, one of Adrian's patients, one of the children from Project Camden. I showed her the files, the emails, the internal memo. She read them in silence. My God, she whispered. We convicted the wrong person. Why wasn't this footage reviewed during the investigation? I asked. Mendez shook her head. I don't know. Callahan was lead. He would have gone through all the evidence, unless someone told him not to. She looked at me. You think the investigation was compromised? I don't think I know. Mendez agreed to go on the record. She gave a statement admitting that the investigation had been rushed, that certain evidence had been overlooked, that there had been pressure from above to close the case quickly. It was another piece of the puzzle. I went back to my apartment and added everything to the documentary. Miranda's testimony, the security footage, the audio recording, the emails. It was all there. A complete picture of what had really happened. But there was still one missing piece. Tyler. Where was he now? I went back to the files on the USB drive, searched for anything about Secure Facility 7, the place where Tyler had been taken, and I found it. An address. A private psychiatric facility in upstate New York, owned and operated by a subsidiary of the Cordell Institute. I booked a flight. The facility was surrounded by tall fences, security cameras, guards at the gate. I couldn't get in, but I didn't need to. I found a staff member leaving after a shift, a young woman, mid-20s. I approached her carefully. Excuse me, I said. I'm a journalist. I'm investigating the Cordell Institute. Do you have a few minutes? She looked nervous. I can't talk about patients. I'm not asking you to. I just need to know if a patient named Tyler Reeves is here. She glanced around. I could lose my job. Please. A girl is sitting in prison for a crime she didn't commit, and I think Tyler is the key to proving her innocence. She hesitated. Then she said quietly, There's a patient, goes by TR. He's been here since 2020. High security. No visitors. No contact with the outside world. Can you get me his file? No, but... She pulled out her phone. Showed me a photo. A boy. Maybe 15 now. Sitting in a sterile room. Staring at the wall. Tyler. They say he's catatonic, the woman said. Doesn't speak, doesn't respond. It's like he's not even there anymore. Did they do that to him? She looked at me. I don't know. But I've worked here for 3 years, and I've never seen anyone get better. They just disappear. I thanked her, sent her money anonymously for taking the risk, and then I added Tyler's photo to the documentary. A boy who had been broken by a system designed to control him. A boy who had fought back, and a boy who had been erased. The documentary was finished. I sent it to my producer, told her to release it immediately. Everywhere, YouTube, streaming platforms, news outlets. Within hours, it was live. The response was immediate. Outrage, shock, calls for investigations. The Cordell Institute released a statement denying all allegations. But the evidence was undeniable. And then, 3 days after the release, I received a call from Eliza's lawyer. They're reopening the case, he said. The courtroom was different this time. Not physically. It was the same room where Eliza had been sentenced 2 years earlier. Same wooden benches, same harsh lighting. Same American flag hanging behind the judge's bench, but the energy was different. Before, the room had been filled with certainty, journalists hungry for a story, a public eager for justice, a system ready to close a case. Now, it was filled with doubt. I sat in the back row watching as people filed in, defense attorneys, prosecutors, reporters, advocates, and in the front row, for the first time since the original trial, Miranda Reed sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the empty defendant's table, waiting for her daughter. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise. The Honorable Judge Samuel Graves presiding. A new judge, younger, with a reputation for fairness, for listening. He took his seat and looked out at the courtroom. We are here today, he began, to review new evidence in the case of the state versus Eliza Marie Reed. This court has been petitioned by the defense to vacate the original conviction based on credible evidence suggesting a miscarriage of justice. He glanced at the prosecution table. The state has agreed to this hearing. We will proceed. The side door opened, and Eliza walked in. She was 15 now, taller, thinner. Her orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a braid. Her face was still blank, still emotionless. But when she saw her mother in the front row, something flickered in her eyes, just for a second, and then it was gone. Eliza's new attorney stood, a woman named Sarah Keller, sharp, relentless, someone who had built a career on overturning wrongful convictions. Your Honor, she began, we are here today because an 11-year-old girl was coerced into confessing to a crime she did not commit. A girl who had been systematically conditioned, abused, and manipulated by her father, a man who used his knowledge of psychology not to heal children, but to control them. She gestured to a screen behind her. We will present evidence, audio recordings, security footage, internal documents, and witness testimony that proves beyond any doubt that Eliza Reed did not kill her father, and that the real killer was taken, hidden, and silenced by the same institution that funded the abuse. The prosecution's new attorney stood, a man in his 50s. He looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, he said carefully, the state acknowledges that certain irregularities existed in the original trial. We have reviewed the new evidence, and while we maintain that Ms. Reed's confession was given voluntarily, we do not oppose the defense's motion to vacate the conviction. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The state wasn't fighting. They were letting her go. Judge Graves looked at the prosecutor. You're not opposing the motion? No, Your Honor. Why not? The prosecutor hesitated. Because, Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself, and the state believes that justice is better served by acknowledging the truth than by defending a flawed conviction. It was a carefully worded statement, political, safe. But it meant one thing: they were backing down. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Sarah Keller presented everything: the audio recording of Tyler and Adrian, the gunshots, Eliza's voice, the security footage showing Tyler fleeing the house, the internal memo from the Cordell Institute outlining the cover-up, Miranda's testimony about Adrian's abuse and the conditioning program, Dr. Natalie Brenner's statement about Project Camden, and finally, the photo of Tyler, catatonic, locked away in a facility designed to erase him. When it was over, Judge Graves sat back in his chair. He looked at Eliza. She stared straight ahead, hands folded, expressionless. Ms. Reed, he said gently, do you understand what's happening here today? She didn't respond. Eliza, Sarah Keller prompted softly. Eliza blinked, looked at the judge. Yes, she said quietly. You were 11 years old when you confessed to killing your father. You've spent the last 2 years in prison, and now we have evidence that you did not commit this crime. Do you have anything you'd like to say? Eliza was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I did what I was supposed to do. Judge Graves frowned. What do you mean? I was taught to take responsibility, to protect others, to never question. Her voice was flat, empty. So when my father died, I did what I was trained to do. I confessed, because that's what I was supposed to do. The courtroom was silent. Judge Graves looked at her with something close to sorrow. Ms. Reed, he said, you should never have been put in that position. No child should, and this court failed you. He took a breath. Based on the evidence presented today, I am vacating your conviction. You are hereby released from custody effective immediately. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Advocates cheered. Miranda sobbed, but Eliza didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the table in front of her, like she didn't know what to do. The bailiff removed her handcuffs. Sarah Keller leaned and said something quietly. Eliza nodded, stood, and then slowly she walked toward the front row, toward her mother. Miranda stood, tears streaming down her face. Eliza stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, and then Miranda stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her daughter. Eliza stood stiff at first, unyielding. But then, slowly, she raised her arms and held on. I watched from the back of the room, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Eliza cried, not quietly, not controlled. She sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body, like years of pain were finally breaking through. After the hearing, I met with Sarah Keller outside the courthouse. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we go after the Cordell Institute. We file a civil suit. We expose everyone involved, and we make sure this never happens again." "What about Tyler?" Her expression darkened. "We're working on it, but it's complicated. He's being held in a private facility. His family signed off on it. Getting him out is going to take time." "And the others? Sophia, Marcus, Camden." "We're still looking," she said. "But it's possible they're gone. Either relocated or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I went back to my apartment that night and sat at my desk. The documentary had done what I'd hoped. It had reopened the case. It had freed Eliza. But it hadn't brought back the children who'd been destroyed. It hadn't erased the years Eliza had spent in prison, and it hadn't stopped the people who had funded, protected, and profited from Project Camden. 2 weeks later, the Cordell Institute announced it was shutting down. They claimed it was due to financial restructuring. But everyone knew the truth. Vincent Holloway, the lawyer, was disbarred. Diana Thornton, the prosecutor, resigned. Judge Marion Holbrook released a public apology. And Douglas Mercer, the CEO of the Cordell Institute, was arrested on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. But Tyler was still locked away, and the other children were still missing. 3 months after Eliza's release, I received a letter. It was from her. "Dear Mr. Williams, I don't know if I'll ever be able to thank you properly for what you did. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. The truth. My mother and I, Mother, are trying to rebuild. It's hard. I don't know how to be a normal person. I don't know how to trust. I don't know how to feel things the way other people do. But I'm learning. I'm in therapy now. Real therapy. With someone who doesn't try to control me, who doesn't tell me what to think or feel, who just listens. And for the first time in my life, I'm starting to understand that not everything is my fault. I know Tyler is still out there. I think about him every day. I hope you can help him too. Thank you for believing me, even when I didn't believe myself. Eliza." I read the letter 3 times. And then I went back to work. Because the story wasn't over, Tyler was still trapped, the other children were still missing, and the people who had designed, funded, and implemented Project Camden were still out there. Maybe not at the Cordell Institute, but somewhere, planning the next experiment, finding the next vulnerable children, building the next program. I thought about Eliza's words. Not everything is my fault. It had taken her 15 years to learn that. 15 years of conditioning, abuse, imprisonment. And even now, she was still fighting to believe it. I opened a new document on my laptop, titled it Project Camden, Part 2, and I started typing. Because the truth is, when a lie is told well enough, it becomes reality. When a system is built to protect itself, it will sacrifice anyone to survive. And when a child is conditioned to believe they are responsible for everything, they will carry that weight for the rest of their lives, even after they're freed. Eliza Reed was no longer in prison, but she would never be truly free, because the people who broke her were still out there, and until they were stopped, there would always be another child, another subject, another Eliza. The system didn't want to hear the truth, but I wasn't going to stop telling it.